Hello, I am attorney Michael Ehline. How you guys doing? I'm an attorney licensed in California and Texas, but I'm also a legal historian. I'm a disabled United States Marine, and I am a patriot and a believer in the natural law process of what created these United States of America. And stand by 1 second here. Give me 1 second here. I've got to figure out what's going on over here. I've got there we go. So I had the live version of my video running for a second, so it was kind of talking over me. But anyways, I believe in natural law advocacy, and the tenets of that. Well, one of the main tenets is that our rights come from a creator, not from the state or the government. And so that's why I've been able to build a pretty sizable audience over the last year. I've gone from a few thousand subscribers to almost 60,000. So make sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you're joining me today, so we can help continue building this channel, so I can bring you real news that's not filtered by corporate media and the bankers who want to destroy your children and your way of life. And so let me just turn off this music. Hopefully you got enough of the intro. So the last couple of videos that I did, I talked about the BRICS nations and their proxy war against America and Israel, the state of Israel. And so in this episode, I'm going to cover one of Colonel Douglas Macgregor's videos, because he's definitely not captive of the corporate media. And I'm going to get into a little bit of the history of the modern state of Israel that was created by the Rothschild family under what's called the Balfour Declaration, so you guys can get an understanding. And then for all of you people who think that this land is actually Palestinian land, we're going to get into why that is a fallacy as well. And because in the law of war and conquest, first in time is first in right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the ancient history of Judea, the Hebrews, and again, I'm going to be doing this from a neutral point of view because I'm not taking sides here. I think it's really scary what's going on. And I think a lot of you guys who, hey, S&S Contracting, what's going on? Hey, Sign Up, good seeing you. What's going on, Simba B? Looks like it's a little early for a lot of people to show up, but it's a Sunday, and I have a full caseload. As you guys know, I'm a lawyer. I do a lot of appellate work, work comp, personal injury, pretty much whatever I can do to feed the family. So I decided I would skip the gym today because I'm really concerned about the misinformation being put out there by the press. And so one of the things that I wanted to discuss today is this so-called, I don't know if you want to call it a ceasefire or what, between the modern land that we call Israel, which is, their flag is a signet ring, which I believe was a pagan symbol. And we'll get into that another time, but many people believe that it should be a different symbol. So we'll talk about that another time, but excuse me, guys, it's a little bit early for me. I don't normally go live this early in the morning, especially on a Sunday. So if I look haggardly, that's why. So I'm going to get into the history of Israel, and we'll talk a little bit about how whenever Muslims conquer someone, they destroy their churches and temples and build a Muslim temple on top of it to prevent the people who they conquered from being able to worship their gods and basically have freedom. And most of you know from my past shows about the jizya, which is a tax that the Muslims require non-Muslims to pay in order to live under their rule, and the taqiyya, which enables Islamic society to lie to the non-believer in order to achieve a caliphate. And there's a similar provision, I believe, in the Babylonian Talmud that allows, well, modernly they call themselves Jews, but they were called Hebrews some time ago. But this all is going to make sense once we start watching some of these videos and you understand the ancient history of this battle between Persia and the tribes of Israel. And we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about the Edomites and God's prohibition on the tribes of Israel from intermarrying with Edom. And we're going to learn a little bit about King Herod, that he was actually an Edomite. and that when he rebuilt the Temple of Israel, many modern so-called Jewish scholars consider him to be an abomination because he was appointed by the Romans, and he rebuilt this grandiose temple that was not in compliance with the biblical commandments of how you would build the temple to God to store the ark. So we'll get into that. And Brett Ray, I agree with you, and we're going to talk about it. But first, let's go ahead and really quickly, I'm going to talk about the intermarriage issue. So intermarriage with pagan nations is a recurring Bible theme, and often it's highlighted as a significant concern for the Israelites. And so it's addressed in the Old Testament, where the Israelites were repeatedly warned against forming marital alliances with surrounding pagan nations. And so there's a prohibition in the Old Testament, what we Christians call the Old Testament, with the Israelites from intermarrying with pagan nations, explicitly stated in Deuteronomy 7, 3 through 4. And the commandment is, do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods. And we know that Edomic religions have been pervasive throughout the modern state of Israel, the secular state of Israel, where they have pride flags. And I'm not going to say anything derogatory about men who want to pretend like they're women or anything like that. But the whole idea of pride goes against the word of God in pretty much every religion, not just the Judaic or the Christian religions, but pride in and of itself is evil, and it's a pagan sort of a religion. So that is something that's going on pervasively throughout modern Israel today. And so Israel was specifically commanded not to do that. And of course, we know that the Edomites and the Babylonians and the worshipers of Moloch and Baal were very prideful people. And so obviously the Bible commands against pride. The pride comes before the fall. So whenever you see a pride flag, it's basically a satanic symbol that encourages people to be prideful. And in this case, the pride flag encourages people to be prideful of who they want to have sex with outside of marriage, which is also prohibited, I think, by pretty much every major religion on the planet. So, and of course, it provides in the Bible that you will turn your children away from me and serve their gods. And so we'll talk a little bit about Lord Rothschild and his secular family. And we'll talk about, just because someone is called Jewish, that doesn't mean that they're religious or really even Jewish, right? It's more of a cultural identity. And so, and again, I have a lot of friends who consider themselves to be Jewish Orthodox as well as secular. And I'm not a religious guy. I'm just a legal historian, and I'm also a military historian. And I've got over 20 years in practice as a trial lawyer and as a litigator. So I'm presenting these things to you just so we can lay a foundation. Okay. I could have 10 different people who call themselves Jewish or Christian on this channel, and they'll all give you 10 different versions of what they think the truth is. Okay. So I'm just giving it to you from my black and white understanding, just from reading from the scriptures and then hearing from their own words. And we're going to get into that. But the first thing, hey, good seeing you. Thank you for hitting that like and subscribe button. And if anybody has any questions or comments, anybody who wants to buy some memberships or who wants to throw me a super chat, even if it's $1.99, it goes a long way to supporting my channel, teaching my kids how to be entrepreneurs. And they're helping me with the channel and helping me do research. And they're homeschooled, and I'm teaching them about homesteading, how to form parallel systems outside the corporate control of government. And we are going to get into a little bit of an overlay from my last show where I talk about this battle not only being ancient, but it's a battle of the BRICS nations against the privately run and controlled foreign banksters that took over our currency system in the United States, starting with Jekyll Island in 1913. And that actually ties in to Lord Rothschild, et cetera, et cetera. And it is a spiritual war, say many sign up. And I want to try to bring this to you from as neutral of a point of view as I can, because I don't want to offend anyone. That's not my point here. It's just to show you what's going on. So we've seen a major sea change in the United Kingdom. And that is where the Balfour Declaration was created. And we're going to get into that in a minute for those of you who don't know about the Balfour Declaration. But the United Kingdom has, like Sleepy Joe Biden, been flooding its country with sub-Saharan Africans, mostly Muslim, and they've covered up stories about RAPE gangs where the natives, the people who are traditionally and historically English, Scottish, Welsh, Irish, are their families are being basically, their girls in particular are being RAPE'd by these gangs. And we know that Two-Tier Kier covered that up for at least 7 years and used the BBC, which is a state-funded news propaganda agency, to cover this up while they flooded their country with these sub-Saharans. And one thing that's interesting about sub-Saharans and that culture down there in particular, especially in Pakistan, which I think is Asia, but the same thing, right? It's the Islamic culture. And I'm not saying all Muslims believe this, because there's Shia, there's Sunnis, there's different types of Muslims. But I'm saying the vast majority of them, like the Sunni and Wahhabis in Pakistan, think that interbreeding is okay. We saw a show on a couple of Joe Rogan episodes where he talked about this. So interbreeding, what it does is it leads to birth defects and extremely low IQs. And so the the theory is that the UK government, because their population no longer really produces enough babies to produce a tax base, is that they're importing very low IQ and extremely violent people into their country, in many cases illegally. And so it's easier to govern someone if you just give them a welfare check. And we saw what's happened to London, right? I mean, it doesn't even look like London just from a few years ago. So good seeing you, Allah Badawi, and all these guys. So I'm just looking in the sidebar here to see if there's any questions for me before I start. Yes, and I remember Prussia, Brett, and I also know about the fact that the Rockefellers imported our education system into this country for the purposes of being able to control the people. And the King of Prussia, after he was defeated by Napoleon and his army mutinied on him, he took the social engineers of his day and created what's now known as the modern public education system, which was imported here by the Rockefeller family, because Rockefeller said, I want a nation of workers, not of thinkers. And we know that the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and several, like the Kuhn Loeb Bank and the Warburgs, created our modern Federal Reserve private bank system, which controls our currency modernly. So we'll talk about that. And Brett Ray, I don't want, well, I agree. Brett Ray says that I shouldn't be worried about offending anyone. Well, so Brett, what I'm trying to do here, honestly, is I don't want to win over people. I want to win them over. And so if I offend people, they're just going to turn off and stop watching the channel. And that's not our goal here at Team MPE. We want to approach people from a viewpoint of love and a viewpoint of caring and correction, so they can learn that all the propaganda that they've been brainwashed with in the public school system and the Marxist-run colleges is wrong. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is to give them a little lesson in history, a little lesson in civility, being courteous, considerate, and kind to others. And then towards the end, after I get over the Colonel Macgregor video that we're going to cover, the reaction video that I'm going to do from a legal perspective and historical perspective, we're going to cover the Lane Myers victim witness impact statement that Reluctant Prophet covered the other day. And as you guys know, I am a supporter of Lane Myers, and I have been more outspoken probably than anyone on his lack of civility in the courtroom and how that probably affected his ability to get justice, because we know that prosecutors and the courts look at the demeanor of a potential defendant or even a plaintiff in an injury claim or any other kind of civil rights claim, because they know that if you come off like a hothead, most jurors are a product of that brainwashing propaganda public education system. And they assume that if you're boisterous, loud, or obnoxious, that you're guilty or that your position has no merit, because that's the way they've been trained to think by CNN, PMSNBC, Fox News, and all the corporate run news media. They call it media, but in my opinion, the modern news media is the enemy of the American people. Repeat after me. Legacy media is the enemy of the American people. And so what I try to do with my channel is present to you a foundation-based understanding of why we're in the position that we are today. And so the first video that I'm going to show you, so you can get an understanding of what's going on, is let's start with what's going on over right now. Right now, what's going on over in the United Kingdom, where the United Kingdom has turned from a pro-Israel nation into a pro-Muslim nation. Of course, we know that that's probably because lots and lots and lots of oil money is being used to pay off British politicians. Of course, that it's always the money, right? But these same oil countries like Saudi Arabia and the radical Wahhabist Muslims are the same people who've allied themselves with China, Iran, and these other BRICS currency nations like Russia. And so the modern war that we're fighting isn't just about religion or historical divisions of geography, but it's really more about replacing the United States Federal Reserve note with a gold-backed currency called BRICS, which is precisely what our founding fathers wanted for this nation, and which is what our Constitution requires. But with paying off Woodrow Wilson and other turncoat treasonous politicians, our country, the United States, became a vassal of a private banking system called the Federal Reserve Bank. But let's first take a look at what's happening in the United Kingdom, and you're going to see why there's a mass exodus right now from people who live in Israel to get the hell out of Israel. And probably we're going to see the absolute destruction of the world, at least of Israel. Now, Israel has what's called the Samson option, where if they feel their government or the religious zealots who are behind the scenes in Israel feel that Israel is going to fall, they're going to launch nukes all over the world and destroy the world. That's called the Samson option. Do yourselves a favor and take a look at it. Now, if cooler heads prevail and people just flee to Greece and other countries that are receiving a lot of the people who are fleeing Israel en masse right now because they know what's coming, there may not be the Samson option. But either way, this war is going to continue forever because the Muslims, who were created much later based upon, I think it was the star and moon cults, and because Muhammad was refused entry into the Judaic religion, he created his own religion called Islam. And many people believe that's why they have the star and the crescent is one of their symbols, because it was a Babylonian cult that was sort of interjected with Judaic and Christian, as well as these other religions, to create his own religion, much like the way Joseph Smith created Mormonism. So let's get into it really quickly. The first video, so you can see the sea change in the United Kingdom, where it was once a Christian pro-Israel state, now flooded with anti-American, anti-native, pro-jihad, pro-Sharia law, illegal aliens. And here's what's going on. Thank you, Kurt, for the donation. And I'll just say it. Kurt Bronson says, 5 USD. I respect and support real men making things better today. Team MPE. Well, I appreciate you noticing that. And that's why I do my morning workouts with my son, sometimes at 4:30 or 5 a.m. and do these videos for you guys to inspire you to make yourselves better, because you can't change the world until you change yourself. And the way you do that is with discipline, because discipline equals freedom, Kurt. And that's one of the things that I really want to impress upon my audience here as we make our own revelations today about what's going on. Let's watch the first video about the downfall of the United Kingdom, which I now call the Islamic Republic of the United Kingdom, and you'll see exactly what's happening over there. It's unbelievable. I mean, if a native in the United Kingdom, a native, I mean like a native Englishman or a native Walesman, Welshman, or a native Scot or a native Irishman was to say these things about Muslims, they would immediately be locked up and probably be thrown in prison for thought crimes, because we know that the modern day British state is embracing Sharia law, which means if you're a non-Muslim, you really have very little rights, according to many experts. So let's take a look at this.
Broadcast live by the BBC.
Free, free! Free, free! Free, free! Alright, but have you heard this one though? Death, death to the IDF! 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 Death, death to the IDF!
So, Tom, just fill us in on the reaction in the UK, because I think the government have come out very upset about this. The BBC are in all sorts of trouble. And that's before we get to the artist in question. Just give us the latest on this.
No, there is wall-to-wall outrage and concern about this, rightly so. If you've got people chanting slogans like that to a packed audience of people at Glastonbury Festival, it does evoke some of the worst moments in human history, shall we say. The way...
Right. So we see that Herr Adolf in Germany has got nothing on what's happening in the United Kingdom. It's like a complete sea change. And I'm not going to get too much into it, but I just want to show you how Arab oil money and Iranian oil money and the ability to pay off politicians in the United Kingdom, it's basically turning the United Kingdom into an Islamic republic. And we know that once they get more power, they demand more rights for their religious beliefs, and they want to, for example, prevent locals from walking their dogs. They're demanding halal foods. If any of the people in the United Kingdom speak up against it, who are the true natives, the native populations of those countries, they're called racists, bigots, and homophobes and thrown in prison. And so it's very interesting to me because remember that it is hold on one second. It is actually the United Kingdom where the Balfour Declaration emanated from originally, which created the modern state of Israel. So now you have the United Kingdom turning their back on Israel. And we're going to get into more stuff. Hey, what's going on, SW Observer? Hey, do. And you're seeing what's happening too, SW Observer. I mean, your country is being overrun with sub-Saharan Africans. And the RAPE rates are up by, I think, over 150% in some areas of your country. And if the native Swedes or even in Norway talk about it, you're thrown in jail, you're silenced, your social media accounts are shut down. You're not allowed to talk about it. So the way your governments are dealing with this is to silence the actual natives. The Viking warriors of your history are being silenced in favor of these sub-Saharans and people with incredibly low IQs, many of whom are engaged in mass inbreeding, which creates a very easy to govern populace, right? Because they're not that intelligent, say many experts. So yeah, you're right, Justin Knight. And England got pretty dark during the Crusades. Well, any of these religious wars also lend themselves to a lot of craziness, and I agree with that. So now let's get into, because this is really what this is all about, okay? This is really what this is all about. So let's get into the history of what's going on. All right, so hold on one second. Let me see if I can get this to work. Okay, cool. And again, guys, I just got my new Shure microphone. I really do appreciate all the donations because I've been using my own personal money to build the channel. And then occasionally when I get a donation, I usually donate it to somebody like Reluctant Prophet or someone like Elaine Myers. So it's not cheap for me to do these shows, and it prevents me from working on my cases. But so many people have come out asking me to continue this type of coverage, which you're not going to find anywhere else on the internet, that it became important to me for my own personal spiritual well-being to be able to educate people with the gift that I have, which is a intellectually high IQ and a desire to learn and teach, because you learn more by teaching than you do just by watching and learning. So you're helping me learn as well. And again, if anybody has questions, even if you're willing to donate $1.99 super chat, I'll put your questions to the front of the line. And if you want to look at BZ Watchdog's shameless self-promotion, which he never comes here to join the conversation, but to promote his own channel, go ahead and take a look at the links that he's putting over there. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and get into the history of Israel and just dissuade you from any notion that it was ever Palestine until the Romans left. Let's get into it.
We embark on a journey through the history of ancient Israel, from the arrival of the Hebrews in Canaan to the Babylonian exile. Later periods will be explored in separate videos. Our primary source for this history is the Old Testament, or Tanakh. Its stories and characters are familiar even to those with little connection to religion. Moses leading the Exodus, the giving of the law on Mount Sinai, David's legendary duel with Goliath, Solomon's wisdom, and his famed encounter with the Queen of Sheba. For centuries, these narratives were regarded as unquestionable historical fact. However, with the rise of archaeology in the 19th century, our understanding of the past began to change. Excavations across the Middle East led to the emergence of a new field, biblical archaeology, dedicated to uncovering physical evidence of events described in the Bible. While many aspects of the Old Testament have been supported by discoveries, others remain unverified, and in some cases, archaeological findings even contradict biblical accounts. In this video, we will delve into the history of ancient Israel, drawing from archaeological and extra-biblical sources, alongside the Tanakh, not as a religious scripture, but as a historical record of the Jewish people. The earliest known mention of the Israelites comes from the reign of Pharaoh Merneptah in Egypt. On a stele commemorating his military victories, he left this inscription: "Plundered is the Canaan with every evil. Carried off is Ashkelon. Seized upon is Gezer. Yanoam is made non-existent. Israel is laid waste.
So you can see that the tribes of Israel, or the Hebrews, pre-existed the modern that came later, the Philistines, which many believe were actually Greeks. And we know that Alexander the Great conquered much of those areas later, but Israel pre-existed the Arabs who later occupied the land which is known as Israel after the Romans kicked out the Jews, the modern Jews, or the Israelite tribes, for rebelling against the government of Rome. So just so you know, I mean, historically, it was never an Arab land. It was never Palestinian. It was called Israel. I mean, let's just be honest about the history instead of trying to make stuff up. Here we go.
Seed is no more. Dated to 1207 BC, this stele roughly coincides with the first traces of a people identified as Israelites appearing in Canaan. They were a loose confederation of nomadic tribes bound by a common language, beliefs, and culture. Where they came from and how they emerged remains a mystery. The biblical account of the Exodus from Egypt has no direct historical confirmation, and if taken literally, it contradicts much of the archaeological record. It is true that Egypt at the time had a significant Semitic population, primarily Amorites, nomadic herders whose name gave rise to the ancient designation of southern Syria, Amuru, as well as Canaanites. Some scholars propose that a portion of this population migrated to Canaan during the Late Bronze Age, blending with the local inhabitants and other nomadic Semitic groups. This intermingling, they argue, could have later inspired the biblical story of the Exodus. Is this possible? Absolutely. But so far, there is no solid evidence to support it. Many researchers link the origins of the Hebrews to the nomadic Habiru and Shasu tribes, who roamed the semi-arid lands east of Canaan and Egypt. These were pastoralist groups, but they also carried out raids on the settled agricultural communities of the Fertile Crescent. Over time, they may have played a role in shaping the early Israelite identity. By the end of the Bronze Age, the Israelites had firmly established themselves in Canaan. Initially pastoralists, they gradually transitioned to a more settled way of life. While they still lived in tents, they had already begun constructing stone enclosures for their livestock. One of their most distinctive traits was their avoidance of pork, a dietary practice that set them apart from neighboring people.
And again, this is also borrowed by the Muslim religion. Much later, when Muhammad was denied entry into the Jewish religion, again, he created his own religion, and he borrowed a lot of the same tenets from the Hebrew laws, including the prohibition on eating pork. Let's get into it.
Excavations at Israelite campsites and settlements reveal an almost complete absence of pig bones in refuse heaps. This pattern extends to sacrificial remains, whereas in other Near Eastern cultures, pig bones typically make up 10 to 40% of such deposits. The biblical account of the conquest of Canaan also faces challenges from archaeology. Many Canaanite cities, including Hazor, Jericho, Megiddo, and Lachish, did indeed suffer destruction. However, this devastation did not occur in a single swift military campaign, as described in the book of Joshua. Instead, it unfolded gradually over nearly a century, coinciding with the widespread turmoil of the Late Bronze Age collapse. Cities burned across the Near East, even in regions where the Israelites had no presence. As a result, we cannot conclusively link the destruction of these cities to the arrival of the Israelites. During this time, the Israelites existed as a loose confederation of tribes bound by a shared language, beliefs, and cultural traditions. The Old Testament names 12 tribes of Israel, but whether this number is historically accurate remains uncertain. Sacred numbers such as 3, 7, 12, and 40 were deeply symbolic throughout the ancient Near East, raising doubts about their literal accuracy. However, 12 is as plausible as any other number. Archaeologically, there is no way to distinguish between these tribes, making it impossible to confirm or refute the biblical tradition. Each tribe was led by a chief known as a shofet, or judge. This period is therefore known as the Era of the Judges. Despite the legalistic title, the shofetim were primarily military leaders with executive power, while legislative and judicial authority rested with the priesthood. Their leadership was not hereditary. At least some were chosen by the people. Notably, women could also serve as judges, as seen in the case of Deborah, who is mentioned in the Old Testament.
And I want to point out that, really quickly, this video isn't totally accurate, as is no historical research. For example, Deborah, women are not allowed to teach men anywhere in any of the great religions. There was one time in case of an emergency where the high priest died, where his wife, Deborah, was allowed to be a priestess until such time as she could be replaced by a male. So this is actually an inaccurate statement. Women have never been allowed to teach men unless in one case mentioned in the Bible, and that in religious matters anyways, teach men in religious matters, except in one case in the Hebrew Bible, and that was because of an emergency. So I just want you guys to understand that you need to do your own research, and I'm just here to present to you the information that I found based upon years and years of studying religion and military history, and you can take it or leave it. And no, I'm not being paid by the IDF. I'm not a really big supporter of any modern culture that controls our banking system and our news media or anything like that. So I'm trying to be as neutral as I can and just present you the historical research that is factual. And then if I see a problem with it, based on my research, I will definitely speak up and tell you where I think it's inaccurate. And if anybody in the sidebar or the chat box wants to come on as a guest and have a debate or present their point of view, I'm always open for that, because the whole point of my channel is to create dialogue so we can understand each other better. It really doesn't have I'm not taking sides. My side is with we the people, because I'm an American first. My religion is the religion of freedom and liberty, and less government means more freedom. So let's get into the continuation of the video. Here we go.
This era, the Israelites waged relentless wars against their neighbors, the Moabites, Ammonites, and Edomites. However, their fiercest and most enduring struggle was against the Philistines. This seafaring people arrived in southern Canaan around the same time as the Israelites, and their name would later give rise to the modern term Palestine. The Philistines originated from the Aegean world, a fact supported by both genetic studies and the clear resemblance.
Yeah, so I think most people who are not brainwashed by religious demagoguery understand that the Philistines were actually Greek. They weren't Arabic, and they came from Greece. I think based on the genetic testing as well, we know that to be true. So that is where the actual name Palestine comes from. It basically is a name that came after the Romans. So at least I'm just trying to teach you the real history. The people who deny history are just, to me, just like intellectually like brainwashed. They're so bound up in their ideology that they can't even look at history as the accuracies of history and genetic testing, which is really sad because it prevents us from coming to some sort of a détente on what's right and what's wrong, right? Because your truth is your truth, the other guy's truth is his truth, and there's no truth. So without truth, there's always going to be calamity, and you're never going to have order from that type of chaos. All right, let's keep watching.
Semblance of their material culture to that of the late Mycenaean civilization. Yet, Due to the near-total absence of written records in their language, their exact identity remains uncertain. They are believed to have been Mycenaean Greeks, or possibly settlers from Crete or Cyprus. In Canaan, they established a formidable confederation of 5 powerful cities: Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, Ekron, and Gaza. With them, they brought one of the most jealously guarded secrets of the ancient world: iron smelting and forging.
That's true.
At first, they tightly controlled this technology, refusing to sell iron weapons to the Israelites. The Old Testament, for instance, notes that iron swords were rare and primarily wielded by kings such as Saul and David as symbols of high status. However, over time, the knowledge of ironworking spread across the Near East, revolutionizing warfare and society. The era of the Judges was a time of brutal conflict between the Israelites and the Philistines. Battles raged back and forth, but the Philistines, with their superior weapons and more organized military, steadily gained the upper hand. The Israelite tribes, fragmented and lacking unity, struggled to resist the invaders effectively. As a result, the Philistines pushed deep into the heart of Canaan, tightening their grip on the region. Faced with powerful...
So again, the ancient tribes of Israel, based on the biblical principles and the archaeological research that's been uncovered, that wasn't destroyed by the Arabs during their occupation of that land after the Romans, does show that the leaders of the tribes of Israel were called judges, right? They were originally judges or prophets, if that's what you want to call them. They didn't have any unified king. So there was a lot of infighting, just like there is today modernly with Hasidic Jews, Orthodox Jews, secular Jews, very similar, but there was really no word or name calling them Jewish. That was created much, much later on in history. Just so you guys get an understanding of what's going on, because things evolved over time. Let's go.
Powerful enemies, the Israelite tribes began to unite under a single ruler, marking the transition from a tribal society to a monarchy. The first king was Saul, from the tribe of Benjamin. According to tradition, he rallied the tribes to fight against the Philistines, yet he failed to establish a centralized state. Saul was a wartime leader, more skilled in battle than in governance. He managed to free Israel from Philistine domination for a time, and inflicted several defeats on them, but his reign ended in disaster. At the Battle of Mount Gilboa, the Israelites suffered a devastating defeat. Saul fell alongside his heir and son, Jonathan. With their king slain, Israel once again came under Philistine rule, and Philistine governors were installed in several cities. Saul's historical existence is difficult to verify, and some might compare him to legendary figures like Romulus and Remus or King Arthur. However, certain elements of his story appear to have a historical basis. The Tanakh recounts that the Philistines captured Saul's hometown, Gibeah, then more of a village than a city. Later, Saul reclaimed it from Philistine control and made it his capital. Archaeologists have indeed excavated Gibeah, uncovering a 12th century BC settlement with signs of destruction, followed by reconstruction and its transformation into a fortified stronghold. These findings align roughly with the period attributed to Saul. While this evidence is not enough to confirm Saul as a historical figure, it suggests that the biblical narrative, beyond its legendary elements, is rooted in real historical events. After Saul's death, David rose to power, ushering in what became known as the United Monarchy. He completed the unification of the Israelite tribes that Saul had begun and established a centralized state, with Hebron as its...
And by the way, this is actually verified by historical digs. So we do know they've now discovered the tomb of King David, and they've discovered enough archaeological research to corroborate that the Bible is actually a pretty accurate, at least what we Christians call the Bible, right? The Holy Bible, the Old Testament, is a pretty accurate description of the history of these lands. So let's get into it.
Its initial capital. David dealt a series of crushing defeats to the Philistines, freeing Israel from their domination. He then conquered the Jebusites, captured Jerusalem, and made it his new capital. Over time, he expanded his kingdom, subjugating Moab, Edom, and Ammon, while the once feared Philistines became his vassals and were forced to pay tribute. Beyond his military conquests, David carried out judicial reforms, conducted a population census, and introduced a system of taxation, laying the foundations of a structured state. David is the first Israelite king whose historical existence is widely accepted. For a long time, scholars debated whether he was a real figure or merely a legendary hero of Israelite tradition. However, two independent inscriptions have provided strong evidence for his historicity. The Mesha stele, commissioned by the king of Moab, and the Teldan stele, written by an Aramean ruler, both mention the House of David as the royal dynasty of Judah. These discoveries have eliminated doubts about David's existence. After David's death, his son Solomon took the throne. His reign marked Israel's first era of peace and stability after centuries of near-constant warfare. This stability led to an economic boom as Israel, positioned along key trade routes between Mesopotamia, Syria, and Egypt, grew wealthy. Solomon's most famous achievement was the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem, which would become the
Saudi Arabia's crown prince says Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to live peacefully on their own land. Mohammed bin Salman made the comments in an interview with the U.S. magazine The Atlantic. It's seen as a sign of warming ties between the Saudi kingdom and Israel. Well, he said, I believe the Palestinians and the Israelis have the right to have their own land, but we have to have a peace agreement to assure stability for everyone and to have normal relations. There are a lot of interests we share with Israel, and if there is peace, there would be a lot of interest.
Thank you for that. So I was on mute. So just really quickly, thank you for pointing that out, that my microphone was on mute. So I see a lot of comments in the sidebar saying that this is all lies. All the history and archaeological digs are all lies. They're all just Jewish lies, blah, blah, blah. Now, the Saudi king, where modern Islamic Wahhabism came from, even admits that this land was historically Israeli land. Of course, his caveat is that since there was a Balfour Declaration and that there was a way where they were supposed to live in harmony, that the Palestinians should be able to have their land and the Israelis should be able to have their land. So let's look and see what he's got to say.
Prince says Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to live peacefully on their own land. Mohammed bin Salman made the comments in an interview with the U.S. magazine The Atlantic. It's seen as a sign of warming ties between the Saudi kingdom and Israel. Well, he said, I believe the Palestinians and the Israelis have the right to have their own land, but we have to have a peace agreement to assure stability for everyone and to have normal relations. There are a lot of interests we share with Israel, and if there is peace, there would be a lot of interest between Israel and the Gulf Cooperation Council. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by a senior political analyst, Marwan Bishara. Marwan, how surprising is it to hear this kind of language coming from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia?
It's not entirely surprising because we've been sort of edging towards it for a couple of years now. I think the Saudis, along with the Americans, have paved the way for what I would like to call normalization of normalization. So before Saudi Arabia does get into some serious cooperation, coordination, security, and otherwise with Israel, it needs to prepare the public opinion, especially in Saudi Arabia. So I think this is part and parcel of a revisionist reading of Saudi foreign policy, a revisionist reading of Saudi history, and certainly a revisionist reading of Saudi approach to the region and its security, notably the relations with Israel. I think, of course, as everyone has been saying the last couple of days, the key word was not just a question of recognizing Israel, because it was understood that Arab and Muslim countries and other countries in the world will recognize Israel once Israel made peace with the Palestinians and the Arabs and withdrew from all occupied territories according to UN resolutions, including the resolving of the refugee question. The issue here is recognizing its right to exist, and some would say its historic right to exist. Do the Jewish people have a historic right to exist in Palestine? Meaning the immigration in the 19th and the 20th century was okay, not as a colonial movement, but as a people's right to exist in Palestine? I think that was the question. Of course, the other aspect of it, which is even more important, the timing. I mean, why now? Just when the Israelis are saying we don't want two-state solutions, just when the Israelis are shooting at Palestinians, expanding and increasing the settlement, the illegal settlement building, when the peace process is not going anywhere, when Trump has just recognized Jerusalem as capital of Israel and basically dropping it from negotiations. So really, this is absolutely the worst time ever to be saying things like that.
But so do you think that Mohammed bin Salman is doing it because it's part of a rapprochement with Israel and the United States? Or do you think that as part of it, he could try to put more pressure on the Israelis to, for example, stop settlement construction in the West Bank?
We certainly haven't heard any of that. In fact, Jeffrey Goldberg, who himself is an ardent Zionist who once upon a time was a prison guard during the first Intifada. He actually went to Israel, volunteered to become a prison guard, guarding the Palestinians. And he then became an important journalist in the United States. And he says, not one word of criticism against Israel. This was all praise to, a possibility of cooperation. So there's no notion of pressure. If anything, it's more or less seen as a Saudi attempt at confronting Iran, knowing all too well that having the likes of Israel and Egypt is a good thing.
But so Marwan, briefly, if you can, how has this gone down in the Arab world then?
Well, in the beginning, there was a bit of a denial in Saudi Arabia itself, and our sister channel, Al Jazeera Arabic, published the exact words of the Crown Prince, and the Saudis started accusing Al Jazeera Arabic for misquoting the Crown Prince, not believing that he would say the things that he said. So I think, generally speaking, it does not go down well, but, dictators are not exactly responsive to public opinion.
Marwan Bashar, senior political analyst, thank you.
All right, so let's get back into our historical research on the history of what we now know as modern Israel, but the history of the original 12 tribes and how they eventually coalesced around a king. Let's get into it.
Ancient inscription or record mentions a king by this name, leading to skepticism about his historical reality. Some indirect evidence exists, such as traces of large-scale construction projects dated to his supposed reign. But without direct confirmation, his story remains in the realm of legend. Still, most historians believe that Solomon was a real ruler, though the grandeur and influence attributed to him in biblical accounts are likely exaggerated. It is important to recognize that the religion, temples, and priesthood of ancient Israel during this period were vastly different from the Judaism we know today.
True.
Or even from the form practiced under Roman rule. This was not yet a monotheistic faith. The Israelites were still polytheists. The religion of this time is often referred to as Yahwism, named after its chief deity, Yahweh. In this belief system, Yahweh was the supreme God, the ruler of all other gods. He was not alone. He had a divine consort, Asherah, or Astarte. Archaeologists have discovered numerous votive inscriptions from this era, bearing dedications such as to Yahweh and his Asherah. In northern Israel, where Phoenician influence was strong, the supreme deity was not Yahweh, but El. This explains why the Old Testament refers to God by different names. Some texts call him Yahweh.
And one of the main issues that we have right now is that there is a great division amongst what we modernly call Jews in the religion and how it's supposed to work because of all the fractionalism and eventually monotheism that came out of this. But the one thing that I think most of the Jews who are not secular believe in is that the Jews can no longer atone for their sins until their temple is rebuilt. And since the Muslims built their temple, the Dome of the Rock, like they do in every country that they conquer, they build one of their Muslim temples. I'm not sure what they call them. If it's somebody correct me in the sidebar there, but I'll just say temple because I think most of us know what that means. Their version of a church on top of the religions that they've conquered. And so the Dome of the Rock is allegedly right on top of the ruins of the Jewish temple. And the only way that the Jews believe that they can atone for their sins, at least the historical Jews, is if they're able to burn sacrifices to God. And so they're not able to do that until the Dome of the Rock is removed. And so that's the big problem that the modern Jews and the Palestinians really have. It's a battle over the Dome of the Rock, because once the Jews can rebuild their temple, then they're in a position to receive forgiveness for their sins, atone for their sins. And that's why they do the oy vey, and they mourn at the Wailing Wall, because when the Romans destroyed King Herod's temple, which was really built in honor of himself. Remember, King Herod was an Edomite, and Deuteronomy specifically commanded the Jews not to interbreed with any other tribes other than those particular tribes that God had consecrated as his chosen people. And the Edomites had sort of excommunicated themselves and engaged in the Babylonian religions and the Philistine religions like Baal worship, Baal, and Moloch worship. And so that's where Kabbalism comes from, and these other offshoots. Many people also say that is the Babylonian Talmud as well. Isn't really true Judaism. True Judaism is the Torah. So even within the modern, what they call the Jewish religion, there's a battle over what is the correct religion, similar to what you might have with the Muslims, with the Shia and the Sunni, or what you might have with the Catholics and the Protestants in the modern Christian religion. So there's really no perfect accord as to what the reality is. Let's keep watching.
While others use Elohim. Over time, Yahweh and El Elohim were merged into a single God, leaving Yahweh as the dominant figure. Yet the Israelites also worshipped other Western Semitic gods, including Baal, Shamash, Chemosh, Yarik, and others. Archaeological excavations of Israelite settlements have uncovered many small figurines, teraphim, which were carried as protective talismans. At this stage, the idea of a single centralized temple did not exist. Instead, numerous temples, shrines, and altars were scattered throughout the land. Most were dedicated to Yahweh or to Yahweh and Asherah, but others honored different deities. Sacrificial practices were also more complex than later Jewish traditions would suggest. Alongside animal sacrifices, the Israelites engaged in human sacrifices, including infant offerings similar to those practiced by the Phoenicians and Carthaginians. Traces of these rituals can be found in the Old Testament itself, in the story of the binding of Isaac, for example, or in references from the book of Jeremiah. The biblical narratives depicting prophets and righteous kings striving to guide Israel toward monotheism, only for the people to repeatedly fall back into idolatry, were written retrospectively. In reality, archaeological evidence shows no oscillation between monotheism and polytheism during this period. Polytheism was the prevailing religious system. After Solomon's death, the United Kingdom of Israel fractured into two separate states. This division occurred around 931 BC. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, took the throne in Jerusalem, but his heavy-handed taxation policies sparked outrage among the northern tribes. Under the leadership of Jeroboam, 10 tribes rebelled and formed their own kingdom. The capital was first established in Shechem, then moved to Tirzah, and later to Samaria. Jeroboam became the first ruler of this new kingdom. Thanks to its position along key trade routes and its fertile lands, the Northern Kingdom quickly prospered. Unlike Judah, where the Davidic dynasty ruled uninterrupted, the Northern Kingdom was plagued by political instability and frequent coups. Over the course of 2 centuries, it saw 19 kings from 9 different dynasties, many of whom seized power through the assassination of their predecessors. Among its most notable rulers were Omri, who established the capital in Samaria and brought political stability. His dynasty strengthened economic and religious ties with Phoenicia, introducing golden calf worship in Israelite cities and constructing a temple to Baal in Samaria. Ahab, Omri's son, who married the Phoenician princess Jezebel, and further encouraged the worship of Baal, El, and Asherah. Jeroboam II, under whom Israel reached the height of its territorial expansion and economic strength. However,
and for those of you joining me, I appreciate it. I know that I've got a lot of people who support what they call Palestine, and there's a lot of people in the chat that support what they call Israel. And I'm just here to present actually both sides of the narrative so you get an idea of the true history of how all this came about. And then we're going to get into what's really going on with Iran and why I believe that that war hasn't even begun to start. That the so-called ceasefire that Trump negotiated is nothing more than a ceasefire. I don't believe there's any peace, and that's why I'm buying up as much UVIX as I can, as well as FAS and gold and silver and Bitcoin, because I don't think that it's over. And we're going to get into that with this video by Colonel Douglas Macgregor in a little while. But first, I want to lay a foundation because I'm a lawyer. And I'm not Jewish. I was raised as a Christian, but I have a lot of friends who were Iranians, their families were massacred by the Ayatollahs back in the 80s, and they fled to the United States. And I've read the book Answer to History by Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and I know a lot about the history of modern Islam and the various sects, as well as Judaism. By the way, it wasn't called Jewish until much later. There were different tribes, and one of them was called Judah. And Judah seems to have been one of the more economically successful tribes. And that's why I think it ultimately became Jewish, because they sort of became the stronger of the tribes. And so economically, it makes sense that they would get to call the religion after their own tribe. I don't know. What do you guys think? Put it in the comments if you think I'm on the right track. Again, I'm not here to tell you everything, because only really going back in a time machine is going to answer a lot of these questions. But let's keep going.
this period of prosperity also saw increasing social inequality and corruption. All of this played out against the backdrop of the rise of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Like many other small states in the region, early Israelite rulers acknowledged Assyrian supremacy and paid tribute to the kings of Ashur. But as Assyria's rulers turned from diplomacy to outright conquest, Israel found itself unable to resist. Tiglath-Pileser III was the first to strip Israel of key territories, seizing the Transjordan region and Galilee. His successor, Shalmaneser V, besieged Samaria after Israel's last king, Hoshea, attempted to form an anti-Assyrian alliance with Egypt. In 722 BC, after a 3-year siege, Samaria fell. The Assyrian king Sargon II deported much of Israel's population to distant regions of the Assyrian Empire. Their descendants became known as the Lost Tribes of Israel.
That's correct.
The Old Testament casts every king of the northern kingdom in an extremely negative light. However, it is crucial to remember that these accounts were written from the perspective of Judah.
That is
From
true.
the Judahite viewpoint, the northern Israelites were apostates, rebels, and enemies of true faith. It would be fascinating to read an account of these events from the perspective of the northern kingdom itself, but unfortunately, no such texts have survived. A massive wave of refugees from the north flooded into Judah, causing the kingdom's population to more than double in a short span of time. Jerusalem, once a city of about 25,000 inhabitants, swelled to nearly 100,000. Other cities experienced.
By the way, I want to thank Katracho24. Thanks for joining my channel today, brother. I really love getting different perspectives, and it seems like you're a pretty base dude. Most of the people on my channel don't agree with me on anything, And I don't really agree with most people on anything either. I believe in being a free thinker and coming up with your own opinions and conclusions because I believe in natural law. I believe in critical thinking. So anybody who just believes what their pastor or their mullah or their religious leader tells them is probably somebody who's not that intelligent. So I really do appreciate you coming on the show today, Katraco24. Hope I got that right. And I really love having people who can bring something to the conversation other than you're a liar or you're a racist or you're a bigot. I mean, that really doesn't do anything to help us uncover the history and why the world is in the position that it's in today. So thank you for joining me today, brother. Let's keep going.
Similar population booms and new settlements sprang up across the land. At this critical moment, Hezekiah ruled Judah. His reign saw an ambitious wave of construction in Jerusalem. The city expanded, new defensive walls were erected, and large-scale waterworks were built to ensure a steady supply of fresh water. At the same time, Hezekiah launched a sweeping religious reform aimed at consolidating his power and integrating the newly arrived Israelite refugees. He banned idol worship, destroyed numerous temples, and prohibited religious rituals outside the Jerusalem temple. To unify religious practices, he sent envoys throughout the former northern kingdom, urging the people to come to Jerusalem for Passover, a holiday he even rescheduled to align with the traditions of the northern kingdom. However, Hezekiah's reign nearly ended in catastrophe. The Assyrian king Sennacherib launched an invasion, devastating many Judahite cities. Jerusalem itself was only spared when Hezekiah bought off the Assyrians with a massive ransom. Despite all his efforts, Hezekiah's religious reforms were quickly undone by his son, Manasseh, who restored idol worship, placed pagan statues in the Jerusalem temple, and erected altars to Baal, Asherah, and Moloch. It was Hezekiah's great-great-grandson, Josiah, who later revived and completed the reforms. Josiah not only destroyed all remaining temples, shrines, and altars outside of Jerusalem, but he also deliberately defiled them, turning their ruins into public latrines as a symbolic act of desecration. During Josiah's reign, the Book of Deuteronomy emerged. According to biblical tradition, this text was discovered during renovations of the Jerusalem temple. However, modern linguistic analysis suggests that Deuteronomy was actually composed during Josiah's time. And not only that, but it was the first book of the Torah to be written. The rest of the Torah was compiled later, also during Josiah's reign, but only after Deuteronomy. This conclusion, of course, contradicts the biblical narrative, which claims that Moses received the Torah directly from God on Mount Sinai. But from a historical and linguistic standpoint, we now understand these texts as products.
So it appears that many people are a little confused. So, and again, I'm a little confused too. So maybe some of you guys who are more up to date on the history here, that it wasn't just the 10 Commandments that were given on Mount Sinai, but it was the Holy Torah, which is, I guess, kind of like the Old Testament, that Christians would call it that. And then they were protected inside this ark of the covenant, right? The covenant between God and his chosen people, the Jews, right? Or they didn't call them Jews back then, the Hebrews, right? And that's something that I'm not totally sure about. So if somebody can help me clear that up with a citation, not just you're a liar and you're an anti-Semite or you're an anti-Muslim or whatever you guys want to put, let's try to do this from a point of view like a lawyer would. I've been practicing law for over 20 years, and I've been proven wrong multiple times in court. And I'm not the kind of guy that doubles down on a position. If you can show me some kind of historical evidence, citations, archaeological proof, that's how I form my opinions, not based on religious dogma. I'm not a really religious guy. I believe that our rights do come from a creator, and I have a personal relationship with my creator, and I hope that you have one with yours as well, and you're not just being brainwashed by some cult to believe things just because someone told you to, because that sounds like somebody who watches too much CNN. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. Let's keep going.
Of their time, shaped by political and religious developments rather than divine revelation. The next kings, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, and Jehoiakim, ruled under the looming shadow of the great powers of the Near East. Assyria, Egypt, and the Neo-Babylonian Empire. They were forced to tread a delicate path, maneuvering between alliances in a desperate attempt to preserve Judah's fragile independence and avoid being crushed by far stronger neighbors. In the end, Zedekiah, who was serving as a vassal to the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II, made a fatal miscalculation. Seeking to break free from Babylonian rule, he forged an alliance with Egypt, hoping their support would help him throw off the Babylonian yoke. But the gamble failed. In response, Nebuchadnezzar launched a brutal campaign against Judah. After a long and grueling siege, Jerusalem fell. The city was nearly wiped off the map, and Solomon's temple, the heart of Judah's religious life, was utterly destroyed. Tens of thousands of Judeans were taken into exile in Babylon, marking the beginning of what would become known as the Babylonian captivity, a defining moment in Jewish history that reshaped their identity and faith for generations to come.
All right, so you kind of get the idea there. So what we'll do next is we'll get into what this battle is really about from my perspective and from the perspective of a lot of my friends who are Orthodox Jews. And that is and I know somebody mentioned that you have sort of a portable altar now that allows you, I guess, at least some people of the Israeli background or the Hebrew background believe that you have a portable altar that allows you to atone for your sins. But many Jews don't believe that. We'll just say Jews for the sake of the modern term Jew, do not believe that they can receive atonement for their sins until they rebuild the temple. And of course, we know that the Muslims, like they do in every country that they conquer, they build their own churches or temples on top of the religious temples that existed prior to them. And so they built their temple right over the most cherished temple to the Jews, modernly the Jews, right on top of that. And so that's what the real battle is about. And so a lot of modern Hebrews or Jews, if you want to call them that, believe that they cannot receive atonement for their sins unless by burnt sacrifice to Yahweh, where you would store the ark, the lost ark, many say, inside of there. So the lost ark with the actual 10 commandments would be stored inside of that temple. And then only the high priest could go in there. I think there had to be a rope tied to him in case he touched it or died, because God's grace or God's might was so great that it would literally take the life of that high priest, and they would have to pull him out with the rope if he passed away. At least that's my understanding. And put it in the comments if you have a different interpretation or understanding of what the scriptures say. But so the real war, I think it's less about who owns the land and more about who owns the right to that area, the Dome of the Rock and the Wailing Wall area. And we know that since the Crusades, even the Crusaders made an agreement with the Arabs that were there, because see, the Arabs believe, or the Muslims believe, that is where, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, because I don't want to butcher your religious beliefs, but that is where Muhammad, I guess, flew up into the sky, right from that spot, flew up into the sky. And so they built the Dome of the Rock there to commemorate that, right on top of the most religious and sacred place to the Jews, which was their holy temple that allowed them to atone for their sins. Let me know if I'm wrong. If you think I'm wrong, I'd like to know, because I'm trying to encourage discussion, not to engage in butchering anyone's beliefs or faith. That's not what I'm about. I'm trying to bring people together, not bring people apart. But let's get into the next video, and we'll learn a little bit about the Holy Temple.
When the 7th month came and the Israelites had settled in their towns, the people assembled together as one in Jerusalem. Then Joshua son of Jozadak and his fellow priests, and Zerubbabel son of Shealtiel and his associates, began to build the altar of the God of Israel, to sacrifice burnt offerings on it, in accordance with what is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. Despite their fear of the peoples around them, they built the altar on its foundation, and sacrificed burnt offerings on it to the Lord. both the morning and evening sacrifices. Then, in accordance with what is written, they celebrated the Festival of Tabernacles with the required number of burnt offerings prescribed for each day. After that, they presented the regular burnt offerings, the new moon sacrifices, and the sacrifices for all the appointed sacred festivals of the Lord, as well as those brought as free will offerings to the Lord. On the first day of the 7th month, they began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord, though the foundation of the Lord's temple had not yet been laid. Rebuilding the temple. Then they gave money to the masons and carpenters, and gave food and drink and olive oil to the people of Sidon and Tyre, so that they would bring cedar logs by sea, from Lebanon to Joppa, as authorized by Cyrus king of Persia. In the 2nd month of the 2nd year, after their arrival at the house of God in Jerusalem, Zerubbabel son of Shealtiel, Joshua son of Jozadak, and the rest of the people, the priests and the Levites and all who had returned from the captivity to Jerusalem, began to work. They appointed Levites 20 years old and older to supervise the building of the house of the Lord, Joshua and his sons and brothers, and Kadmiel and his sons, descendants of Hodaviah, and the sons of Henadad and their sons and brothers, all Levites, joined together in supervising those working on the house of God. When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests in their vestments and with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals, took their places to praise the Lord, as prescribed by David, king of Israel. With praise and thanksgiving, they sang to the Lord. He is good. His love toward Israel endures forever. And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads, who had seen the former temple, wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. No one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away.
And again, if you have another source, I'd love to do another show, especially people who are of the Islamic faith. If they want to share with me their sources, I have no issue in doing another show. I just basically was able to sort of garner a lot of this information from doing research and then trying to find a video that fit with the historical and archaeological understandings of what happened in that land thousands of years ago. I see a lot of really negative comments, man. It's like, you guys don't even want me to talk about this stuff, and you're accusing me of being a Zionist and all this stuff. Guys, I'm just a free man upon the land. I'm not really religious. I'm just trying to explain, again, why I think that this war between Israel and Iran is far from over, and that I do believe that Iran has sleeper cells in the U.S. I think that since Sleepy Joe opened our southern border to, by some accounts, over 20 million illegal aliens and at least 2 to 5 million gotaways, that there are probably man pads, which were sold on the black market in Ukraine, as well as all kinds of weapons of mass destruction, including but not limited to fentanyl and molds and viruses that were smuggled in by our enemy, the communist Chinese. And I don't think that this war is anywhere near over. And I do believe that those so-called nuclear sites in Iran had long since been abandoned. I don't believe for a second that we destroyed anything. And so in that regard, I'm a lot different than a lot of people you guys call MAGA or whatever. I just don't believe it. I don't think the Iranians are that dumb. I think they have a pretty strong intelligence agency, and I think they have allies in the United States. For example, the Obama administration, right, gave these guys $400 billion, much of which they used to fund Hamas, and using that money to invade into Israel and massacre people at a music festival. So there's a lot more than meets the eye here to me, as well as to the true history of what's going on. But let's get into it. Let's learn a little bit about the Edomites, because this is a real issue here that I have, is that many people who are historic researchers believe that the modern Jewish people are not genetically Jewish, that they're actually Edomites. And we know that God forbade Israel, even though they had been brothers at one time, right? I guess they call them Adamics, the red, that the Edomites, because they worship Baal, Moloch, and other gods that were not the gods of the 12 tribes, these people were evil and they did not want them interbreeding. But ultimately, King Herod, an Edomite, at least part Edomite, went ahead and was appointed by the Romans to rule over Israel. And he rebuilt this temple much more grandiosely than the Bible wanted the temple to be built. And so many believe that that temple was not the true temple to Yahweh, or whatever the word that the modern Hebrews use. And so there's a schism there that basically that the covenant between God and those people ended because they allowed an Edomite to rule over their land, and he was not a true Jew. And we know that Deuteronomy absolutely forbids the Jews from interbreeding with anybody but one of those 12 tribes. Very much a closed society. So let's learn a little bit about what the book of Obadiah says from this person's perspective. Again, I mean, everybody has a different interpretation of what the Bible says and what the Quran says and what the Book of Mormon says, but let's listen to what this interpretation says. So at least you get a little bit of context, and then you can decide for yourself what you want to believe.
This is the shortest book in the whole Old Testament. It's a mere 21 verses. And at first glance, it does not look very promising. It's a series of divine judgment poems against the ancient people of Edom, which was a nation that neighbored Israel on the other side of the Dead Sea. However, there is way, way more going on here. So, first, here's the backstory. The people of Edom were unique because they had a shared ancestry with the Israelites. They both belonged to the family of Abraham, who, with Sarah, had their son Isaac, who, with his wife Rebekah, had two sons, Jacob and Esau. Now, the book of Genesis told us the story of these two brothers, and to say the very least, they had a tense relationship. They each later received the names Israel and Edom, which eventually became the name of the families that descended from them. And these families replayed the same difficult relationship of their ancestors. Israel and Edom had enormous tensions throughout the centuries, but they still shared that family bond. And it's that bond that was betrayed and shattered in the tragic events of Jerusalem's fall to Babylon. So when Israel was invaded and conquered by Babylon, the people of Edom took advantage by plundering other Israelite cities and then capturing and even killing Israelites.
And fun fact, so Babylon is modern-day Iraq, just so you guys get an idea of the geography of what's taking. So this has been going on for thousands of years, guys, and it hasn't stopped. Let's keep going.
Refugees. Now, in other prophetic books, God held Israel's neighbors accountable for this kind of violence. And so here, Obadiah does the same for Edom. The short book has two halves. The first part is a series of accusations against the leaders of Edom, specifically for their pride and self-exaltation. Literally, as they lived up high in the desert rocks, but also metaphorically, they truly believed they were superior to the Israelites. And it's that pride that led the Edomites to not just stand idly by when Babylon came to destroy Jerusalem, but actually to participate in the destruction. And so God says through Obadiah that Edom will be brought down from their height and destroyed. As they have done to Israel, so it will be done to them. Now, right when you think you're going to hear more about how Edom will meet its doom, the topic suddenly shifts in verse 15. We hear this: "The day of the Lord is near against all nations." Now, why do we all of a sudden shift from Edom now to all nations? This verse is a hinge piece, and it links the first half of the book to the second half, where Obadiah announces the day of the Lord, but not only for Edom. He widens his focus to include all nations. And Obadiah says that all prideful nations that act like Edom will face God's justice in the same way. They'll fall from their prideful heights and come to ruin. Now, the combination of these two sections, one about Edom, the other about all nations, shows us why Obadiah was so interested in this tiny southern neighbor of Israel. Obadiah sees Edom's pride and fall as an example, an image of how God will one day confront the pride of all nations and bring about their fall too. It's hardly coincidental that in Hebrew, the word Edom, or Edom, is spelled with the exact same letters as the word humanity, or in Hebrew, Adam. In Obadiah, Edom's rise and fall is a parable of how God's justice will one day oppose pride and violence among all nations in the day of the Lord. But as in all the prophets, God's judgment is never his final word. Specifically, remember the conclusion of the two books that came right before Obadiah, Joel and Amos. Joel had painted a picture of what will happen after the day of the Lord against all nations. He said that God would perform a new act of salvation in Jerusalem, and that all who humbled themselves and called upon him would be delivered. And in the conclusion of Amos, he said that after the day of the Lord has judged Israel's evil, God would raise up the house of David and build a new kingdom for Israel that would include Edom and all the nations called by my name. And so the book of Obadiah has been placed right after Joel and then Amos to expand on these very promises about the hope of God's kingdom over all of the nations. And so the book concludes with a very hopeful future. God says he's going to restore his kingdom over the New Jerusalem, that he'll repopulate it with a faithful remnant. And then from there, God's kingdom will expand to include all the territory and nations around Israel. And so
we see that happening. We've seen leaked reports. Many say are leaked reports that Israel wants to create greater Israel, which of course many people are saying that's reminiscent of Adolf's plan to create Gross Deutschland, or greater Germany. And we see a lot of parallels, right? But one of the things that we definitely know is that there was definitely a prohibition on the ancient Israelites from intermarrying with the Edomites. And once they did that, and King Herod, an Edomite by blood, became the ruler of Israel, many modern religious scholars who are more Orthodox or Hasidic believe that that is when God again broke his covenant with the Israelites. And of course, when the Romans kicked out the Jews from Israel and replaced them with the Philistines, which became modern Palestine, many people believe that that's when the Jews were scattered among the earth. And there's another theory that the Ashkenazi, or the Russians, adopted the Jewish religion for economic survival, and that genetically the modern Jews are not even Aramaic or Semitic, but they're really European. And that's the real problem that a lot of the Arabs have, and the Muslims who live in that part of the world. They just think that a bunch of Europeans now occupy this land that they call Israel. So I just want to throw that out there for you so I can get the other side of the story out there that you don't hear in the state-run media that we have in the United States. Here we go.
This little book contributes to the larger portrait of God's justice and faithfulness that we're seeing in the prophets. The ancient pride and betrayal of the people of Edom becomes an example of the greater human condition, all of the ways that we betray and hurt each other in God's good world.
Good seeing you, Jody.
But there's hope, Obadiah says. Edom's downfall points to the day when God will deal with evil in our world, but also bring his healing kingdom of peace over all the nations. And that's what the book of Obadiah is all about.
Well, that's his interpretation. You know, I honestly, I'm always ready to hear your side of the story, but I'm just trying to give you a historical basis for why the world is in the situation that it's in today. And so let's bring it full circle. A lot of you guys know that the Simpsons use this guy as their image for the evil corporate guy. And his name is Lord Rothschild. And many people believe that the Rothschilds interbred with the British royal family, and that King Charles, if you look at him, he's almost a spitting image of this guy, Lord Rothschild. And so many people believe that when King James of Scotland, when that bloodline was broken in the House of Windsor, the Germanic king came into power, that he had an alliance with the Jewish merchants and allowed them to intermarry into the royal family, which is kind of striking because the modern King Charles is flooding his country with Muslims and jihadists and inviting them, and using his friends in the BBC, state-run media, as well as politicians like Two-Tier Keir, to replace his own population of very high IQ natives, critical thinkers, with the sub-Saharan Africans, many of whom are into inbreeding. which many say that they're easier to control. So it's striking to me. I don't really understand the end game here, other than that the modern populations of Europe are no longer reproducing, and they need bodies to pay taxes. And so the governments of Europe, along with the World Economic Forum, have decided to replace the natives with people from sub-Saharan Africa. That is the argument. And then Lenny Malley says, no, the Rothschilds actually bred and interbred with Cain's bloodline. Well, that's interesting. If you have any links, look, I'd love to do another show where you guys share with me or even come on as guests to present your side of the story. This is by no means the last word, but let's listen to how the modern state of Israel was created, because this is pretty shocking to me, because the Balfour Declaration is simply a letter. It doesn't have any force or effect in law. So at least from my understanding. So let's listen to how modern Israel was created from the mouth of a multi-trillionaire, by some estimations, Lord Rothschild. Let's get into it.
History, and it begins with 3 words. Dear Lord Rothschild.
Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of His Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet.
Why was it that this letter was sent by the Foreign Secretary to your great-uncle Walter?
It's an interesting question, because it was primarily a movement from Eastern Europe, but they didn't clarify who was in charge of that movement. And in addition, it was, after all, in Great Britain. So they felt that the Rothschild family should be the one to whom it was addressed. And Walter was Lord Rothschild, and he was a Zionist. And those really are the background reasons.
So Walter received the Balfour Declaration, and I have a copy here. And I wonder if I could possibly ask you to read it for us.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. I'm going to put on my spectacles to make sure I read it accurately. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment of Palestine as a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours, Arthur Balfour.
And here it is, the Balfour Declaration.
All right, so just give me 1 second. I think there's some other. So the Balfour Declaration was a public statement issued by the British government in 1917 during the First World War, announcing its support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in what was then called Palestine, then an Ottoman region. It was controlled by the Turks, okay? And they've been working closely with them, the Zionists, since 1903. He strongly believed in their near mythic influence, and he was what's called the Christian Zionist, making him an ideological compatriot. And immediately upon assuming office, Lloyd George directed his staff, in particular Mark Sykes and Lord Arthur Balfour, to negotiate Jewish support for Margaret Macmillan explains, from early 1917, with Lloyd George's encouragement, Sykes met privately with Weitzman and other Zionists, and the final attempt, perhaps most important factor in swinging British support behind the Zionists, was to make propaganda among Jews, particularly in the United States, which had not yet come into that war, and in Russia. So that's
National Zionist movement throughout World War II. The Weizmann archives, foolishly or wisely, gave me complete access to all the Weizmann correspondence with Churchill. And in the Weizmann archives, all Churchill's correspondence with Weizmann throughout the war years and before the war, and all his notes on his meetings with Churchill. And I'm only going to mention one of those letters here. It's a letter written by Chaim Weizmann, the leader of the Zionist movement, at that time living in the United States, to Winston Churchill in September 1941, 3 months before Pearl Harbor, when Churchill is frantically trying to claw the United States into his war, because that's his only salvation. And Weizmann writes to Churchill a letter which he says, Mr. Prime Minister, unless you grant us what we want, which is the creation of a Jewish army in the Middle East, with our own arsenal and our own weapons and our own uniform and our own flag, unless you grant us what we want, then you are not going to win us over. And let me tell you what we will do if you do grant us what we want. If you grant us our wishes, then we will act on your behalf in the United States. And remember, Mr. Churchill, he writes in this letter, remember, we are the only powerful, unified bloc in the United States which solidly backs the British cause in this war. September 1941. Everybody else is basically isolationist. We are the only ethnic, unified group which solidly backs the British cause. We are the only people who are in the position to bring the United States into this war. We did it in the last war, and we can do it again.
And so this particular author, I can't remember his name specifically, but he wrote a book about, I believe, Holocaust denial. And he was banned and I think convicted of crimes in the United Kingdom for daring to speak about it. I think his name was David Irving, if somebody can correct me. And Lenny Molly, I'm going to cover Lane Myers in just a few minutes. We're almost done with what's going on here. Actually, it's going to be a little while, probably a little longer than that, because we still need to cover Douglas Macgregor, because all this was for today was to lay a foundation for what's going on in the world and why I believe that this war with Iran is nowhere near over. And I believe that we're going to be drawn into a third world war, whether we like it or not. So really quickly, we're going to talk about now a little video about the creation of our Federal Reserve banking system and how it started and how it was basically created by what many call Zionists. And this is, David Irving. Okay, Whispers, thank you. So Whispers, hopefully you can see that I've done a lot of research, and with over 20 years practice as an attorney, I've become very good at doing historical research as well. And so my goal here is to present to you at least as much as I can in the short amount of time that we have without losing too many of you, to give you an understanding of why geopolitically we're in the situation that we're in. I'm not here to take sides with Israel or take sides with the Muslims or anything like that. I'm here because I'm a free man upon the land with my own free thought and free will as God created me. And so all I want to do is share with you what I know, and then hopefully encourage you guys to go out and do your own research so you're not basically propped up by dogma, because we know that the same people who run these large corporations are the same people who are behind Balfour and who are behind a lot of things in this world that many people complain about. So let's learn a little bit about what this guy has to say. And this guy is a far left, as far as I'm concerned, a Marxist. So I'm getting you sources from people who aren't just dogmatic on a particular belief system. So let's listen to what this actor has to say. Let me just clear up a little bit on my screen here so I have more room. All right, let's listen to what this guy has to say.
From behind closed doors. And so many rumors have sprung up around organizations like the Bilderbergs and the Council on Foreign Relations that it's really difficult to know what to believe. However, it is an interesting fact. The Federal Reserve Bank of the United States is not actually owned by the government. It is owned by a private banking cartel. Now, whoever these men are that can loan money to governments have to be some of the most influential men in the world, and yet we don't know who they are. Not all conspiracy theories are just theories, and the research for this film pulled up some interesting quotes.
I'm turning off the sound because I don't want to get hit with a copyright strike. Henry Ford, Woodrow Wilson. Since I've entered into politics, I've chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the United States are afraid of something. They know there's a power somewhere, a power so subtle, so organized, so complete and pervasive that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. Banks. Here we go. And I'm just kind of unmuting it so we can see. Actually, I'm going to put it on closed caption so we can see when someone's actually talking. Okay, here we go.
Regulation. One would think the power to regulate the money supply, that controls our economy and affects our lives in every way would be in the hands of the government of the people.
Since there's music, I'm not going to get too much into it. The power to control the money supply, I'm just going to say it to you, is in the hands of the Federal Reserve Bank. It is important to note the Federal Reserve is not a government organization. It is a private banking cartel. The Federal Reserve System is a banking cartel. It is no different than the banana cartel or an oil cartel or a sugar cartel. It just happens to be a banking cartel. Congress is in essence has ceded total control of the value of our money to a secretive central bank. It's a group of very large and powerful private banking interests. Congress knows nothing of the conversations, the plans, and action taken in concert with other central banks. The government has given it a monopoly, a virtual monopoly, to create the nation's money supply, Federal Reserve notes. But all these actions directed by the Federal Reserve alter the purchasing power of our money. This has significant consequences on our economy and political stability. Wages never keep up with profits on Wall Street and the banks, thus sowing the seeds of class and discontent. It is bewildering to think that we allow an unelected, unregulated group of private bankers to wield such incredible influence over our society. The truth is that most of us will live from paycheck to paycheck in a continued state of struggle, unable to question a system of finance that keeps us on a constant treadmill. And while most of us struggle to stay ahead, billions of dollars in profits flow into the hands of private bankers at our expense. For this is how the system works. Whenever the government needs money, it requests it from the Federal Reserve. But the Fed doesn't just give the money to the government. It loans the money at interest. What a scam. Every dollar the government loans from the Federal Reserve Bank has to be paid back with interest by you and I. This keeps the government and, as such, the people in a continual state of debt. All of our income taxes are paid back to the Federal Reserve to pay off the debt the government incurs when it borrows money from the Federal Reserve Bank. This is all a matter of public record and is easily verifiable. Should you care to look, the founding fathers of America were well aware of the perils of central banks and sought to prevent them. Several central banks were settled but then removed, but ruthless and powerful bankers, the Rockefellers, the Morgans, the Warburgs, and the Rothschilds, were determined to set up a central banking system in America at any cost. In the early 1920s, J.P. Morgan, one of the most influential bankers of his day, caused massive panic in the markets by spreading rumors that many private banks were about to go bankrupt. This caused widespread panic. Everyone started withdrawing their deposits en masse, and the banks had to call in all of their loans to try and survive. The hysteria destroyed the markets, and the banking elites, having caused the panic, used it to influence politicians and the public that a central bank would create a stability to the system. And a secret meeting in 1910 at the estate of J.P. Morgan on Jekyll Island, the bankers wrote the Federal Reserve Act. They then gave their considerable financial and political support to Woodrow Wilson, a traitor to the American people, on the condition that he would support the bill if elected. In 1913, Woodrow Wilson signed the bill into law. He later wrote in regret, "Our great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Therefore, all of our activities are in the hands of a small," I'm going to stop this, "group of men who chill and check the true economic freedom. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, completely controlled, and dominated governments in the world. No longer a government of majority, but a government of opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." We just saw those men a second ago. Pretty scary stuff, guys. Let me see if it's still playing. Well, in essence, that's where we are today. So, and that brings us into our next video. So, guys, what I'm getting at now is I was able to lay a foundation of what this war is about today. So this is a battle between the BRICS nations and the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank, a privately controlled banking cartel. And them, along probably with the CIA and possibly even the Mossad, some people say, are in a battle to keep the U.S. Federal Reserve note as the world's reserve currency. It was made the world's reserve currency after World War II. And what ended up happening is the Europeans shipped all their gold over to Fort Knox, but the Federal Reserve Bank actually owns all the gold. And so now the Europeans are demanding all their gold back. And of course, remember when Donald Trump said we were going to do an audit of the Federal Reserve and all that disappeared? Well, it wouldn't really matter if the gold was there or not, because in the 1980s, before Congress, it was determined when Reagan was in power that all of the gold in the Federal Reserve Bank, or pretty much all of it, like 90% of it, is owned lock, stock, and barrel by the private Federal Reserve banking system. So we don't have it. Even if it's there, we don't own it. So the BRICS nations, much like our founding fathers, have created their own currency system backed by gold and metals of intrinsic value like silver, which is precisely what our Constitution requires. And so that is exactly what's happening. And so now we're going to find out what this is all about, listening to Colonel Doug Macgregor. You're not going to get this on CNN or corporate run media. So I do appreciate you guys joining my show today. Again, I'm attorney Michael Ehline. I've got over 20 years in practice as an attorney. I'm a legal researcher, legal historian. I'm a 70% disabled United States Marine. I know a lot about history, and although I practice personal injury law to support my family, my true love is the Second Amendment and the concept that less government means more freedom. Give me a bunch of ones if you also feel that way. And if you do believe that way, please make sure to like and subscribe to my channel and join in. And if you want to come on as a guest, if you can provide something of value, if you have some kind of a background of expertise, I'd love to have you on as a guest and hear what you have to say, because my audience is very desirous and hungry for real truth and real information that you won't get from the lamestream media. So let's get into, and I do agree with you, Whispers in the Dark. Absolutely. That's why the Clintons took out Gaddafi, because he was trying to create his own currency that was freed from the Federal Reserve banking cartel. So let's listen to what Colonel Douglas Macgregor has to say, because I really think he's onto something here. Let's get into it.
Generation, as you know, tends to watch the mainstream news and the mainstream media. They don't delve too deeply. They're heavily invested in all of the pension funds. And so all of their thinking is tied to the assumption or the notion that, everything's going to be fine. Whatever happens, the government will intervene and make it right, and et cetera, et cetera. I think we're in different territory right now. And when you say what happened in the last 12 days, well, I think the Israelis, we're talking then about Mr. Netanyahu and his inner circle, were frustrated with the lack of progress in terms of dragging the United States into the war against Iran, and decided to begin it on the assumption that three things would happen. First, that they would have the advantage of surprise. And indeed, President Trump and his cabinet, his envoys, all contributed to that illusion. They helped with surprise. They helped to mislead the Iranians. So the Iranians, the Israelis assumed, would be very weak and completely off their game, if you will, because they weren't expecting to be attacked. Well, as it turns out, they recovered from the attack much, much more quickly than anybody believed. I certainly was shocked at how rapidly they regained control of their air defenses, how quickly they responded with counterattacks.
And by the way, I just noticed that I got a super chat, and I apologize for not getting to you sooner. Let me see here. It is from Wolf's Watch, and Wolf's Watch, I'm trying to put it up on the screen, but Wolf's Watch says, thank you, by the way, Wolf's Watch. That $50 will go a long way to helping me recover what I had to spend on my new Shure microphone. So what Wolf's Watch says is, I just found your channel and just started viewing the live stream, giving you the benefit of the doubt, supporting on your prompts to stick with actual history. I'm so sick of all the brainwashing. I'm an independent Christian. MAFA, Make America First Again. Dude, you just came to the right channel. Please make sure to share this video to other people, because that's what I'm all about too. I want to know what the history and the truth is, not what we've been brainwashed to think by our Marxist, communist-run education system and this nonsense university system. It's just ridiculous the way they've destroyed the minds of our children. Here, I found your chat. I'm going to star it, and I'm going to put it up here for my audience to see. Everybody, give me a bunch of ones for Wolf's Watch. He's precisely the kind of person that I want to have as a subscriber, somebody who's a free thinker and doesn't believe anything that the mainstream legacy media has to say. So guys, make sure to like and subscribe to Wolf Watch's channel as well. And Wolf's Watch, when I'm done, I'll go ahead and I'll take a look at your channel. Thank you for supporting my channel. It means a lot to me. I think most of my members know that I can make a lot more Federal Reserve notes by working on cases. I'm behind on a lot of briefs that are due on Monday. So I'm bringing this at great sacrifice to my family and my personal time to share these things with you, because I believe in America first as well. And I believe that in order for us to change history, we have to know how we got here. So let me get back into the video. And thanks for all the ones and for supporting the Big Wolf. All right, Big Wolf. Here we go. Let's listen to what Colonel Douglas Macgregor has to say.
And indeed, just a few days ago, Ben-Gvir, who is part of the Netanyahu inner circle, was caught saying to a group of Israelis and some Americans, well, we just underestimated the Iranian arsenal. We didn't realize that they had all these missiles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what's happened is that what was supposed to be a knockout blow and leave Iran essentially naked in the face of Israeli military power backfired. And the Iranians did not only recover, they began launching huge quantities of missiles, doing enormous damage all over Israel. Now, people are giving various estimates, but a quick look at Haifa or a quick look at Tel Aviv, as well as a lot of military installations, tells the story. Israel has taken a lot of damage, and it has been unable to cope with it. So then they reached a point where it became clear that they desperately needed some interruption in this. Something had to stop because they're running out of missiles of their own.
I mean, yeah, Israel was being leveled by the Iranians. I have friends who live in Israel. Again, I'm not a partisan when it comes to this. I believe in the sanctity of all human life, regardless of whether or not you're a Muslim or you're a Jew or whatever. I believe we're all God's children. And Israel was absolutely being leveled by hypersonic missiles. Their anti-aircraft systems were not able to cope. And as a result, thousands of Israelis are fleeing to Cyprus and other countries, the same way that they were forced out of Israel, over 1,000 years ago by the Romans, right? The same history is repeating itself again. The problem is now that Israel has nukes, if they use the Samson option, the whole world is going to be leveled. But let's keep listening to what Colonel Macgregor has to say.
In other words, we can't produce air defense missiles quickly enough to meet the Israeli demand. And just today, Raytheon published some statements about the lack of rocket motors. We don't even build our own rocket motors inside the United States anymore.
Right.
So you can imagine if we're not building our own rocket motors and we need components from overseas, well, we're in a lot of trouble. So we can't replenish all the missiles that we've shot as well as the Israelis. And we've shot hundreds from our destroyers offshore, as well as from the Theater High Altitude Air Defense Battery that's on the ground in Israel and so forth. So then I think there was a discussion, well, how do we disrupt this? And you got this strike by President Trump. I think President Trump was trying to sort through what he ought to do, what he ought not to do. He was listening to lots of people. Remember, he said, I'm going to take 2 weeks and think about this or something. Then a couple of days later, bang, you get the strike. Well, he consulted with people, and they said, this will be really good if you do this. This could bring everything to a halt, and this would be good for Israel and the United States. And ultimately, that's what we want. And so I think he bought the argument. I think he was also concerned because a lot of people told him the Iranians can close the Straits of Hormuz. And normally we think of, well, they'll sink a ship there or they'll mine it. Well, they can do those things. But to be quite frank, if the Iranians tell anybody that wants to go through the straits, they can't go through. And if they do go through, they risk being sunk. The insurance companies will shut down the Straits of Hormuz.
That's it. So here's what's going to happen, guys. And I told you guys this in my original video. If you go to my channel and click on the lives, I talked about this several days ago. Look, these insurance companies like Lloyd's of London are not going to cover the shipping. They're not going to insure these ships if they think that the Houthis and the Iranians are going to shut down the strait or threaten shipping. And so as a result of that, the oil supply that flows out of there is going to be cut off. Now, who's going to benefit from that the most? Probably the United States, because we're the world's largest producer of oil. And the Europeans won't be able to get their oil from that area of the world. And we know that they've got a problem right now with Russia. And we know that because of all their lunatic climate change groups, that the Europeans don't want to use that much gas. And apparently they've shut down some of their nuclear reactors, I believe, in Germany. And I think Germany's reliant on, I believe, France now for a lot of their power. I mean, Europe is falling, guys. It's falling apart. And so all Israel has to do is just strike that. Iran has to do is make a threat to shut down the flow of oil or threaten to start attacking shipping, and the ships are going to stop. So strike that again. Iran doesn't have to do much to effectively shut down the oil flow from that area. Now, will China be that affected? Probably not. They can get their oil from Russia. And they're doing through the Belt and Road Initiative, they're building a road into Iran so they don't have to rely on the Strait of Hormuz. So I don't see China as being that affected. So it's really going to be the Europeans and these climate change nutcases who are going to be affected most. So it's a real problem. And Whisper says that Norway has a lot of oil. Yeah, but the problem again is they've got these climate change nutcases, primarily funded by communist China, right? Communist China funds most of these fringe groups because they want to maintain their economic stranglehold. So they convince these blue-haired mafia nutcases that oil is evil, even though a volcano causes much more damage to the ozone layer than thousands of years of oil. They're not going to have the energy supplies that they need. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. All right, let's listen to what Colonel Macgregor has to say.
It's because they won't insure the vessels. So I think all of that was swimming around, and the impact of this loss of, say, 25% of the world's oil would not be acutely felt immediately here, but certainly around the world. And I think he understood that had implications for China, implications for Russia, for the whole world. And I think then he decided, well, I've got to do something else. Now, we've seen this strike that was launched, and he's been on the television all day long promoting this narrative that we found these installations, we've destroyed all the nuclear capability, it's over. We'd set Iran back for years. Well, the truth is something different. We seem to have hit sites that were empty. There were no nuclear development facilities there. People were removed. The Iranians were warned 2 hours in advance, and the Iranians actually accommodated us. We came in and dropped munitions on empty targets. Then subsequently the next day, the Iranians informed us that they were going to hit our installation, air base in Bahrain.
Thanks, One Love.
And they knew that we'd already evacuated everyone from Bahrain. So that was an ideal target. They told us they were coming. They bombed it. They destroyed it. In other words, I think you have a situation where, truthfully, neither Iran nor the United States want to go to war with each other. And so he knew that if he did something, that was better than nothing, but he didn't want to do anything that would widen the war. So now he's telling everybody, well, the war is over. There will be no more war. It stopped. And it stopped because I'm the great peacemaker. I'm master of the universe. So I control everything. I stopped the Indo-Pakistani war. I stopped all these other things. And now I've stopped this. Both sides are exhausted. They can't continue and so forth.
Not true.
Well, that's not really true. And that's a dangerous thing for him to say. So at this point, I don't have any more to tell you except that more to follow.
Well, a lot of this feels like political theater. And to your point, we're being led to believe that this was a very successful strike. These were very key nuclear sites. We destroyed them. We destroyed Iran's ability to have a nuclear weapon. And I think that that's part of what gets so confusing. By the way, off the top of your response, you mentioned Nassim, and his book, Black Swan, has spiked in sales just in the last couple of days because everyone is expecting maybe a Black Swan scenario, World War III to start. And the last time you and I spoke, you actually forecast that we might get into a hot war with Iran. So it seems like some of this is playing out. But right now, to your point, President Trump is saying it's all over. He dropped the bombs, then he dropped an F-bomb when he was questioned by reporters.
We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
And now things seem to be de-escalated, but you're saying maybe that's not the case and things could erupt again. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, what we have is a ceasefire.
That's it.
That means the two sides have agreed not to shoot at each other.
For now.
The first, of course, being the Israelis who said we won't shoot. Now, what does that mean? What is the basis for the ceasefire? What is the long-term goal that the ceasefire is supposed to achieve?
That's right, Lenny.
What are we doing to facilitate some sort of agreement, understanding that will prevent any further killing in the region? Do you know? I don't know. As far as I can tell, there's nothing. And so what we have is a ceasefire, during which I fully expect the Israelis will do everything in their power to get as many missiles, as many weapons as they can, repair radars, repair everything to get ready for the next round.
Absolutely.
In other words, I don't see any evidence that the Israelis are dancing in the streets saying the war is over, we've won, we can relax. No, quite the contrary. I think Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and so forth are all going to be very, very busy now trying to produce more missiles to get them back up to speed for the next round of attacks. And I think in Iran, the Iranians are happy because they don't want to be bombed. But on the other hand, they're well aware that what they've done is actually quite an achievement. They've overwhelmed Israeli defenses. You know, any air defense system can be overwhelmed.
Guys, thank you again. Wolf's Watch, once again, another super chat. Thank you again. I haven't done anything with my channel yet. I'm still learning. I'm a fellow disabled vet, Air Force, Grenada. Okay, Grenada. I think you mean Grenada. And Army Desert Storm. I know I have struck gold here, an attorney that tells the truth. Well, I have no objections to that statement. It's very rare to find a lawyer who tells the truth, but you guys got to remember, my background is blue collar. I started out in the construction industry. I had a limousine business. I was Rodney Dangerfield's limousine driver. I helped start several health club chains, and I had a construction business. And from being constantly dealing with clients who didn't want to pay me and making CSLB complaints to get out of paying me for the work that I did, I ultimately became a paralegal. I had an altercation with the West Covina cop over a parking ticket where he beat me up and then charged me with resisting arrest. And from that point, I sued him under the Civil Rights Act. And I ultimately found a way to become a lawyer with no law degree or law school. So I have been brainwashed by the government-run, bankster-run education system. I'm a free thinker and a critical thinker. And that's probably why I get along better with people like you, Wolf's Watch, than I do with most lawyers, because I do believe in thinking outside the box. And being a disabled U.S. Marine and having a father who was sucked into the Vietnam conflict based on a lie, the Gulf of Tonkin, which never happened, which was completely fabricated, I believe, by the CIA to suck us into that war. My father ended up dying from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from being exposed to Agent Orange. So I do not believe the mainstream media. I do not believe what the government has to say. And my philosophy is less government means more freedom, that we need to return to the Bill of Rights and the constitutional republic, and that we need to secure our borders and make sure that people that are in our country actually believe the same thing. In the republic, individual rights, we should not be flooding our country with people who are hostile to our way of life and who want to overthrow our government from within. So I think that's what makes me different. But Wolf's Watch, we need to help you build out your channel, man, because people like you need to help get the word out. So we've got a new member, guys, Wolf's Watch. You stick around long enough, I'll make you a moderator, Wolf's Watch. Let's get back into what Colonel Doug Macgregor has to say.
It's just a matter of numbers and time. During World War II, we lost 18,000 bombers, we and the Royal Air Force, trying to penetrate German air defenses. The German air defenses at the time were state-of-the-art. They were excellent. But ultimately, we won because we could produce more bombers faster and send more of them through the air defenses than the Germans could produce pilots, aircraft, anti-aircraft guns, and so forth. The problem for the Israelis is that this is a country smaller than New Jersey. They originally had 9 million people. That consisted of roughly 2 million Arabs and then 7 million Jews. I don't know what the actual population is right now, but a lot of Jews in Israel are trying to leave Israel. In fact, it's gotten out of hand in Cyprus to the point where one of the leading—
That's right. People are fleeing Israel because they know that that communist China and Russia probably have been supplying the Iranians with hypersonic missiles. Again, they're BRICS nations, and they're at war with our Federal Reserve private banking system. And that's really what this war is about, guys. And so I fear for those people who live in Israel, and I can understand why they're fleeing, because their cities are being leveled. And again, it's a very, very small area geographically, and it's getting leveled by these Iranian missiles. Don't think for a second that this war is anywhere near over.
Politicians in Cyprus named Stefanu gave a speech and said, we can't allow this to go on. And somebody said, what do you mean can't allow what to go on? Well, the Israelis, or people from Israel, are buying up all of this property. We're losing control of Cyprus. Well, why would they be buying property on Cyprus? Well, ostensibly, that's where they plan to move. This is not a particularly good sign for Israel. Then there are 700,000 Jews in Israel with American passports. In other words, dual citizens. And our ambassador, Mr. Huckabee, is trying to find a way to help these people leave Israel. These are not good signs. This is too reminiscent, in my judgment, of what's happened in Ukraine with Zelensky. So everybody is saying, oh, no, Israel's invincible and vulnerable, and they're in charge, and they control everything. Well, if that's the case, why are we witnessing these things? I think this is a very dangerous situation. I don't see any evidence that anything has ended. I don't know how long this will last. It could last 2 days, could last 2 weeks, could last 2 months. And during that time frame, I think both sides will absolutely re-equip, replenish, and get ready for the next round.
Can we back up for a moment? Because lately on social media, I see people shiv and modern. And then there was this massive change that happened. And I also do want to actually make a separation here between the Iranian government and the Iranian people, the Israeli government, the Israeli people, because just like here, I mean, our views as Americans don't always reflect our leaders, right? And the choices that they make. And I think everyone's conflating a lot of
Sorry about that. I just got no mic. Okay, strike that. I just wanted to let you guys know that if you want to support my channel, pick up a copy of My Journey to Becoming a Practicing Lawyer with No Law Degree or Undergrad. If you go to my YouTube channel and click on the description, you can pick up a digital version of this for $19.99. And I apologize, I was on mute because I just had a conversation with John Felix. Hopefully you guys have sound now. Give me some 5x5s. So I do apologize for that. I'm sorry. Hopefully it wasn't too long, but the sound should be on. There's just always a little bit delay. But John Felix is going to be coming on. He is a by ancestry Greek, and he just called me, and so I put you on mute so I could take the call. So I apologize for the slight delay in volume, but again, I do appreciate it that HL just threw me a $5 USD, and I always stop the show. I try to anyways, when I get a donation or a super chat to show my appreciation. So I don't mean to try to disrupt the programming, but it's a really, really big deal because I don't accept sponsorships because I want to be able to have free thought. I'm not like CNN or Fox News. Okay. Because as soon as you accept money from these people like Big Pharma, you have to start pushing their bullshit narrative. And I'm never going to do that. So everything that I do here is donations driven. And in any event, looks like I've got John over here, I think. Well, not yet, but I'm waiting for John to join me. John Felix, a very good friend of mine who I became friends with just recently. And he is also somebody and a government accountability expert. And so hopefully he'll be popping into the chat in a few minutes. But in the interim, I do want to thank HL. That $5 to you could be $50 to someone who's well off. Again, it's a donations-driven channel. I do appreciate it. Now, hold on a minute. It looks like I've got 5x5. So, Lenny, are you telling me that my sound is still off? Okay, we got a hot mic. Okay, good to go. And by the way, thank you, One Love, for all your kind and gracious comments. It's rare because I have so many people who are just so full of hate, and they're so brainwashed by either Fox News or the Communist News Network, CNN, or PMSNBC, government-run news, that they're incapable of critical thinking. And so it's so nice and refreshing to have people on my channel who actually understand the concept of critical thinking. So I'm going to go back. Now, somebody says that the video is censored. So probably when I shut down the sound, we lost some of that. So let me go back a little bit and we'll start over a couple minutes back and we'll listen to what Doug Macgregor has to say. And hopefully John Felix will join the chat soon and we'll get into that.
American passports, in other words, dual citizens. And our ambassador, Mr. Huckabee, is trying to find a way to help these people leave Israel. These are not good signs. This is too reminiscent, in my judgment, of what's happened in Ukraine with Zelensky. So everybody is saying, oh, no, Israel's invincible and vulnerable, and they're in charge, and they control everything. Well, if that's the case, why are we witnessing these things? I think this is a very dangerous situation. I don't see any evidence that anything has ended. I don't know how long this will last. It could last 2 days, could last 2 weeks, could last 2 months. And during that time frame, I think both sides will absolutely re-equip, replenish, and get ready for the next round.
Can we back up for a moment? Because lately on social media, I see people shiv and modern. And then there was this massive change that happened. And I also do want to actually make a separation here between the Iranian government and the Iranian people, the Israeli government, the Israeli people, because just like here, I mean, our views as Americans don't always reflect our leaders, right? And the choices that they make. And I think everyone's conflating a lot of this together. But can you back up and talk a little bit about how we got to this level of conflict with Iran and people, I mean, even in the leadership positions like Ted Cruz, when he went on Tucker Carlson's show, kind of hinting that they should have a regime change. President Trump was tweeting about how they should make Iran great again, but that's up to the people. I mean, I'm just a little bit confused, I guess, about the dynamics between the government and the people of each of these countries.
Well, I think you have to distinguish the Iran from 1979 and the Iran today, 46 years later. It's actually very, very different. Some colleagues from Egypt flew to Iran during Ramadan. They actually went to the city of Qom, Qom, which is the theological center of Shia Islam in Iran and in the world, frankly. And they were shocked at what they saw. The restaurants were full. It was all
right. So really quickly, guys, I've got John Felix in here joining me, and he's Greek by descent, and he's definitely one of my historians. Looks like he's cruising. John, how you doing today, buddy?
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and give you the screen. Go ahead and tell me what's going on.
I'm in my car, obviously, right? So you don't need me on camera, do you?
No, you look great. You're on camera. People are looking at you, man.
All right. So I'm behind on the live stream, but you were talking about Israel, the Dome of the Rock and stuff. Do you mind if I take it back there?
Oh, go for it, man. I want to hear what you have to say.
So you were saying that the Temple Mount, which is what the Arabs call Harem al-Sharif, and even if you go to Israel, if you ask an Arab there, where's the Temple Mount, they're going to say, what the hell are you talking about? Because they don't call it that. Right there in Jerusalem itself. And then if you ask a Jewish person there, what is Harem al-Sharif, they're going to go, what are you talking about? Right? So the Jews call it the Temple Mount. The Arabs call Harem al-Sharif or something like that, place of happiness, I think it believes in. And yes, they believe Muhammad from the rock, inside of the Dome of the Rock, is just a piece of rock. This is just like the top of a mountain or a hill. There's a rock there, and there's like a footprint there where supposedly Muhammad and his horse, his spear, or horse went and flew into heaven from there. And it's the second holiest place for the Arabs outside of Medina and Mecca. And the Jews obviously believe that David built his temple there. And then obviously that city's the most important city for Christians too, because Jesus took the walk there on his way to the crucifixion, right?
I gotcha. Hold on.
Good? All that sound good?
Yeah. So where is the Temple Mount then for the Jewish temple or the Hebrew temple?
Well, they believe that's that place, that same place where the Dome of the Rock is. And they believe that the Ark of the Covenant, there's also a little section on the dome, the rock that's inside the Dome of the Rock, the gold building, the famous building. There's a little rectangular cutout there, and they believe the Ark of the Covenant was there. So, and practicing Jews don't walk on the Temple Mount because in their religion, they're not allowed to step over where the Ark of the Covenant was. They're not allowed to walk over it. And since they don't know where it is, they stay off of there. The religious, the ones that practice Judaism. It's also controlled by the Palestinian Authority, but Israelis always encroach on that space, and that's a lot of what causes the hostility. Another thing to know about the Dome or the Temple Mount is that's actually that whole section. If you look at it, there's gigantic walls, right, that surround the whole thing.
Yes.
Okay, those are the walls of Fort Antonia. Fort Antonia they built that place. The Romans built that place when they took over Jerusalem, and it's called Fort Antonia. And there's also a controversy there that the Temple Institute is a Zionist Jewish temple educational college or something, and they're preparing for the second coming, the Armageddon, this whole thing, Revelations or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And in order for that to happen, the third temple needs to be built on the Temple Mount. So that's why that place is the most controversial piece of real estate in the whole world. And there's so many flare-ups and stuff. And this Temple Institute also has they have everything ready to go. As a matter of fact, they've imported the red heifers from a rancher in Texas so they can have red heifers there because they need to sacrifice animals. So when their thing comes about, they believe that they're going to stand there and sacrifice animals and throw them in this fire pit so they can be God's chosen people. So you got a couple issues there. You don't mind if I just keep ranting, do you?
Keep on going, buddy. That's why you're here.
Okay, so that section is actually Fort Antonia. Those walls all the way around, all those gates, that is a Fort Antonia because the Romans went there with legions of men, which is like thousands of people. And they were in that little area there, those walls. It's called Fort Antonia. What's the point of its Fort Antonia? The point is that is not where the temple was built. The Wailing Wall that the Israelis lease from the Palestinian Authority so they can go there, and wail and rock back and forth and put their little notes in the cracks. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Where all the presidents go, and for whatever reason, every president must go there immediately. Our president, not the Israeli president. They must go there. They must put on the yarmulke, and they're forced to do this ritual. And anyone who doesn't do that is basically ostracized in politics, which is ridiculous. And where am I going with this? Oh, this new mayor of New York was a socialist leftist, basically, but his last debate, he just won the Democratic primary over there, by the way. He's a Muslim, which is insane. Just communist. To think about that. Yes, basically. And New York is like the Tel Aviv 2.0. It's the second most populated area by Jewish people outside of Tel Aviv. So during the debates, all these candidates, one of the questions from the moderators is, where would you go if you got elected as mayor? And they asked 5 people this, and they're all mayoral candidates. Oh, I'm going to the Holy Land. The second guy goes, I'm going to make my first trip to Israel. The third guy goes, I'm going to take my 4th trip to Israel and my 3rd trip to the Ukraine, our 2 biggest allies, right? Which is more horse shit. And finally, they get to Zoran Mamdani, the guy I'm talking about, who actually won the Democratic primary, the Muslim. He says, I'm going to stay here in New York, where my constituents are. And that was too radical for him to say that. So the moderator goes, oh, well, let me jump in here. You wouldn't go to Israel? He goes, no, I'd stay here in New York and talk to the Jewish people here and go to the synagogues here, you know, which makes sense. He's not Israeli. That's not our country, right? So then she follows up with, you believe Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state? And he goes, yeah, I believe they have the right to exist with equality for everybody there. And she goes, as a Jewish state? Like, she kept pressing this, and it must be a Jewish state, which means to them that they want it to be 80% Jewish people in Israel so they can have an ethno-supremacy. And Israel is an ethno-supremacist apartheid state. They've been occupying the West Bank and Gaza since 1967, which is a violation of UN Resolution 242, and they're in violation of international law and a myriad of a million other things I could bring up, but I don't want to get you kicked off YouTube. Obviously, let's just say they've committed atrocities since the minute they stepped into Palestine. And I don't know if people in your audience, they probably know, because I'm sure you have a very smart audience, but there was no Israel before 1948. And when they bring up the term Israel in the Bible, it doesn't refer to a geographical location. It refers to Jacob. You were talking about Jacob and Esau earlier.
Correct.
And so you got Jacob and Esau. Jacob was descendants of Jacob. A lot of people will say is white people, and then descendants of Esau are all the other races. This is not every faction or every denomination of Christianity, but Jacob was renamed by God to Israel. So when you say the nation of Israel, you're referring to Jacob himself and his followers. You're not referring to some geographical location. So let's see if I covered all the bases here. The place the Jews call Temple Mount right now is actually Fort Antonia. It's not where the temple was built. This is another controversy. There's right below I forget which direction, the south or something. Just like, I don't know, a few hundred meters from Fort Antonia is what's called the City of David. You know what I'm talking about when I say that?
Yes.
So the City of David is also known as Zion. The place they currently call the Temple Mount is built on top of Mount Moriah. The City of David is a few hundred yards from there. And the reason they say that's actually where David, was it David that built the temple? I believe it was David, right?
I think originally.
Yeah, so, and I believe that's the second temple, is that the one he built. So the temple was actually built in the City of David, or Mount Zion. And the reason they're saying that is because theologians and biblical scholars, when they look at all the information in the Bible, and what it says is the Jewish religion needed something called living water. In other words, a fresh source of ongoing water. And there's a source of ongoing living water there in the City of David. When they do their rituals, they go, I think they call it a mitzvah, where they go and clean themselves off so they can be clean when they go to the services and stuff. And right. Everything geographically lines up to the City of David, where there's the spring of, I used to know the name of the spring, but there's living water. And to this day, that natural spring still is living and running in the City of David.
Interesting.
So with all that stuff said, The Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, is actually the Western Wall of Fort Antonio. The temple wasn't built on a Temple Mount that they're calling the Temple Mount. It was built in the city of David, where there's living water. The Gihon Spring, I think it's called the Gihon Spring. It's still functional and operating to this day, and it made perfect sense because they're close to living water. If it was actually in the Temple Mount, they would have to go do their mitzvah and then walk several hundred yards through the desert, and they'd be dirty again by the time they got to the temple.
So question.
Yeah,
John,
go ahead.
Why is it then that the modern state of Israel believes that the Dome of the Rock is built on their temple?
Probably that is a good question. My guess would be the Schofield edition of the Bible, and the way the Bible's been taught for many, many years. Again, the thing I'm telling you about the city of David is it's not a widely held belief, but it's the most sensical belief. Okay, and then the Temple Institute has a model of the Temple Mount, and they show this little tiny section inside the Temple Mount that says this is Fort Antonia, and the rest of this big thing is the temple, which is nonsense, because if the Fort Antonia was that little tiny thing inside there, there's no way they could fit 10,000 soldiers and this and that. It's the whole thing. The whole Temple Mount is Fort Antonia, which makes more sense because thousands of Roman soldiers lived and worked there, and their legions and everything, their backup personnel. So where am I going with this? And then I'll leave you, man.
All right.
So, and this is the type of stuff I love to talk about, man.
Yeah,
so,
I'm glad you're here.
Thank you for having me, man. I really appreciate it. And I hope I'm not losing anybody in the chat, and I hope I don't cause anything bad. I say all this with good faith. So if you think about it, everything can be solved if the Jews built their third temple, where the temple actually is.
John, hold on. Lenny Mowley says it's called the Gihon Spring.
Yeah, the Gihon Spring. I remembered.
Okay, go ahead.
She's right. Yes. So if the Jews wanted to build their third temple, they could build it in the city of David, where it actually was built, and they could fulfill their prophecy without going to war, without all the atrocities, without all the BS, and they could fulfill their prophecy that way. So that's where I'm getting at there. And Zionism and Judaism are not the same thing. Zionism is a colonial settler project started by Theodor Herzl. It's actually started by a Russian Jew before that. But Theodor Herzl in 1895, he wrote a book called The Jewish State. And that's what started the political movement called Zionism today. Zionism is not Judaism. Those two things should not be conflated together. Okay? It's a secular, non-religious political movement started by Theodor Herzl in the 1890s. And what they started talking about was a place for the Jewish people to go have their own home. And the reason was because they were being pogromed everywhere they went. In other words, people would come into their cities and literally commit atrocities against them, and because they were hated worldwide. And a lot of that comes from the people think that they killed Jesus. So, and the money changing and the usury. Christians were never allowed to loan somebody money with interest.
Right.
Well, if you weren't Christian, you were allowed to do that. So the Jewish people would engage in what's called usury, which is charging interest on a loan, which is basically American life at this point. Let's be honest. Mortgage, you got to pay for your house 2.5 times. Credit cards, that's all usury. And then Jesus got mad at the Jews. He went and flipped over their tables because they were engaged in usury. And we know what happened to him. And they're going to say that they didn't actually kill him, but they made the orders. They made the plans to kill Jesus. So, again, back to the city of David. They could build their third temple there. They could avoid all these atrocities, all these wars, all this everything. They could go kill all the red heifers they want, and everybody could live in peace. But they're not doing that.
Now, John,
and I think that's the crux of everything I wanted to say.
And John, if you read the Magna Carta, by the way, I believe it talks about that, about I think only the Zionists or Jewish people were allowed to charge interest. And I think that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why they became so intertwined with the royal family. Is that a fair statement?
As far as the royal family, I don't know, but that's how the Rothschilds and them were able to amass fortunes. Not only that, they were tipped off about a war. They knew a war was coming, and they gave information to the government or somebody, and the information was false. So it crashed the market. The Rothschilds went and bought it all at next to nothing. And then when the real news came that wasn't true, the markets all shot back up, which meant what? They became ultra-billion millionaires. And to this day, and the Rothschild family is the first ones that financed the aliyahs the migrations that went to Israel, and they bought the first biggest plot of land over there, and they started forming what's called kibbutzes, which are little communist farming communities, and they would not let Arab people work there. So slowly but surely, they started buying the land and migrating over there. The Arab, you want to go through the whole history of Israel? We could do that on a different time.
You will do it on a different time because I still have to cover the Lane Myers.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and I still got to get through with.
Hey, I'm about to start a new podcast. Can I plug that?
Absolutely. Go for it, brother. Always.
So I have if you don't know, my first channel is called John Felix or Philax if you're hooked on phonics. My second channel, I'm going to turn into a podcast where I actually talk about stuff like this and these third rail topics. Like what Michael and I just discussed, that is never discussed. It's taboo. You're not supposed to talk about it. But these are the things I like to talk about because they're important and they really affect the world in a real way. People die over these beliefs, so they are important to talk about. My second channel is called Resisting Without Violence, and that's what I'm going to name the podcast. I'm going to have guests on like Michael, and we also have a organization we just started, a Bill of Rights organization, nonpartisan. It's called Transparency Accountability Coalition, TAC or TAC-US.org. Sign up for free. We're just getting started. We have the board members include J-Town Press, James McClinnis, Mark, Eyes on the State, Liberty Troll. This is a public service. You know the guy who dedicated his whole channel to Lane Myers?
Yeah.
He's a board member of TAC.
Nice.
So TAC-US.org. John Philax, Felix is how I pronounce it because it sounds cool. Philax is my first channel, and then Resisting Without Violence is going to become my news political commentary channel. Michael, thanks so much for having me on, man. Thank you for letting me go on this rant. I really appreciate you.
Oh yeah, brother. I always love that. Guys, John Philax is the GOAT. He's one of the original government accountability guys on YouTube. I think you've got over 300,000 subscribers now, something like that.
Like 250,000.
Okay, that's pretty damn good. Guys, make sure to like and subscribe to John's channel. Really
Yes,
cool
guys.
guy.
Thank you.
Love having you, man. And I will talk
Thanks
to you
for having me, dude.
Semper Fi, brother. Take care.
Right on. Yes. Bye.
All right, guys. So you kind of get an idea, like, again, so I don't know everything. I'm trying to cobble together as much information as I can so you guys can understand why I don't think that the Iran-Israel conflict is over by any stretch of the imagination, which is also why I've been buying up as much UVIX and FAS stock as I can, because it's based on the Fear and Greed Index, or the VIX. And obviously, I would love it if I could put together enough Federal Reserve notes to get my family out of the U.S. into a safer country. And I do believe that we need to be based on a gold-backed currency or a system of currency based on intrinsic value. So I've invested quite a bit into Bitcoin as well as other types of coins like Ethereum and XRP. And obviously, I can't give financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor, but that's what I'm doing. And so far, I've done very well. The more volatile, the better, because you can buy at the dip. If you look at a historical chart of cryptocurrency, in particular, Bitcoin, you'll see it it'll go down. You buy at the dip, it'll go up. You buy at the dip, but it keeps going up. And so I think that is going to be a store of value in the future. And we heard Colonel Macgregor talking about that. So let's get back into it with Colonel Macgregor here. Hopefully I can get this thing back on the screen. Give me 1 second, guys. And I'm going to try and find this doggone video again and share it with you. Hopefully you guys can see it. Give me 1 second. Dag nabbit, what happened to Colonel Macgregor, guys? Give me 1 second. Let me just stop screen sharing. Let me go back to screen sharing. Just bear with me, guys. I'm not a total pro at this. Again, I practice law as a profession, and because of the fact that I'm a critical thinker, I'm able to try and share this information with you from a lawyer's perspective, from somebody who believes in laying a foundation. So there we go. Okay, so we're going to get back. So hopefully, guys, give me a bunch of ones for John Felix. Really good guy. He's got a totally different perspective than a lot of people, including myself. But I always learn a lot from him because he's one of these self-educated guys who wasn't brainwashed by the Marxist-run university system or public school system. And I definitely encourage you guys to homeschool your kids, homestead, grow your own food, get off of the injected garbage that the government is forcing you to put into your bodies. Keep your phone in a Faraday bag whenever possible, and learn about history by using critical thinking. Don't use ChatGPT or Grok. It's been programmed by people who are enemies of the Republic, in my opinion. Good seeing you again, SW Observer. I'm glad you popped back in. One Love says that UVIX was selling at 23 at the close of market. I believe that I was able to buy it at the dip for around 22.50. I think it's the lowest it's ever been in the history of UVIX that I could find. And it's a 2 times leveraged ETF that's based on whenever the fear index goes up high, it goes up really high. I think when Donald Trump was shot, it went up to like $200 a share. So if you were able to buy it and put a trailing stop on it, and you were able to buy enough of it, you could have made millions of dollars in Federal Reserve notes, which what I do then is I convert it into gold and silver royalties, and then I'll leverage it against MSTR by getting MSTY. And my MSTY dividends are up really high, over 38,000 a month right now. And that goes up and down too. But the idea is, guys, is getting off of this Federal Reserve note currency system and getting yourself into something where you can survive what's coming. So let's go ahead back into listening to what Doug Macgregor has to say. Here we go.
During Ramadan, when normally everybody fasts. If you go to any of the Arab countries, the restaurants were shut down. No one ate until after sundown. Not in Guam and not in Iran. In other words, it looked like most European cities.
UVIX.
And contrary to their expectations, most women were not walking around in bags. In fact, anything could be further from the truth. I think Iran has changed a great deal. The mosques, it used to be packed, and the police, it used to herd people into the mosques, literally at gunpoint. You know, you got into trouble if you didn't go to the mosque on Friday or for Friday prayers. That's over. If anything, they have trouble mobilizing people to go to the mosques. I think Iran has changed dramatically. Second thing is, and I'm glad you mentioned this, there are some other similarities between what we started to do in Ukraine and failed to do and what we seem to be interested in doing in Iran. Our objective was not simply to build up Ukraine and turn it into a battering ram that could destroy Russia. We had people in the City of London banks in New York City and elsewhere that were salivating at the prospect of bringing down Putin, destroying the regime, ultimately fragmenting Russia, and then stripping Russia of its numerous resources. In other words, make Russia back into a third world vassal state that could be exploited, which is effectively what happened in the 1990s. Well, that's failed. Putin isn't going anywhere. There will be no revolution in Russia, and Putin is strongly supported. So now let's fast forward to Iran. If you look at Iran, Iran has a number of minorities inside of it. I know Ted Cruz is unfamiliar with this sort of thing, but you have Azeri Turks in the north, millions. You have Arabs. You have Baluchis. I mean, we go down the list. More than 50% of the country consists of a so-called Persian population, original. But the truth is, Persian culture, Persian identity have been extended across the country. The country is actually far more cohesive than everybody thinks, just as people discovered that Russia was far more cohesive than everybody thought. We have been trying to start Muslim insurrections against the Russian state for years. And look at the performance of the Chechens and the Muslim troops that serve with the Soviet armed forces. Brilliant. I mean, they're among the best troops on the ground fighting in eastern Ukraine. So that's failed. This is the next opportunity by the same group of people to do to Iran what they failed to do to Russia. And no one should have any doubt in their minds about the desire to capture those oil and gas fields in Iran and control it. That's what they want to do. But Iran has turned out to be far more resilient, far more robust than thought.
I think so, Kurt.
And on top of that, of course, you have Russia and China who are both standing with Iran. The defense minister of Russia, when the president of Iran was visiting yesterday, or just before he left, I guess yesterday, said there is no doubt that Russia will stand by Iran. We support them. We will stand by them. The Chinese have said much the same thing. And remember, Pakistan is effectively the face of Chinese power and influence when it comes to support for Iran. So I think everything that was assumed has failed. And the notion that now everything is fine because there will never be a nuclear weapon is absolutely laughable. Because in Iran and across the region, in fact, probably around the world, everyone has concluded if you want to survive in a world where the Americans and their Israeli proxies are ready to attack and destroy you, well, you better get a nuclear weapon. That's the lesson. So now we will see nuclear weapons proliferate.
Well, so was Iran getting close to a nuclear weapon? Because that's something that we've heard from Netanyahu.
I think that Iran has had nukes for quite some time. I'm interested to hear what Colonel Macgregor has to say, but I'm pretty sure they've had nukes for quite some time, guys. I mean, they've been working with North Korea and the Russians and the communist Chinese. Give me a bunch of ones if you think that Iran already has nukes, and they may have even smuggled in fissile material using their sleeper cells during this time that Sleepy Joe opened our southern border and ordered Border Patrol agents to help facilitate the illegal immigration and treason violating U.S. law to flood our country so he could use illegal aliens in sanctuary cities to redistrict the country blue using the United States Census. Give me a bunch of twos if you think I'm a tinfoil hatter. Let's check it out.
Netanyahu, during countless interviews and testimonies before our political leaders in Washington, D.C. I mean, he's been saying this for a long, long time. And then I believe Tulsi Gabbard testified saying, no, they don't. But then President Trump was on the plane and said he doesn't care what Tulsi Gabbard says. And they were very, very close to it. And that's what this was all about. I mean, forgive me for maybe being conspiratorial, but I feel like, of course, they have to be close, right? A lot of our adversaries around the world probably would want a nuclear weapon to be able to defend themselves. So how close were they or weren't they?
Well, if you go back to 1995 and move forward from that, almost every year, you can find public statements and speeches, both here in the United States as well as in Israel, where Mr. Netanyahu is telling everybody Iran is within 2 weeks of a nuclear weapon. Iran is within 2 days of a nuclear weapon. I mean, it's been going on and on and on. Mr. Netanyahu wants and wanted was to drag the United States into a war against Israel's adversaries in the region. That's what he wanted. He's gotten it. Whether we like it or not, we are in fact at war now in a very demonstrable way with Iran. Now we're at war with Russia too, but we haven't engaged directly. So we tend to tiptoe around the illusion that we're not at war with Russia. But the Russians understand that Iran was never a threat until we decided to invest heavily in it, install a government, and fight them. Well, the same thing is true right now with Israel. Israel is very definitely interested in having us on the ground. When I say on the ground, I'm talking about primarily our air and naval power, do everything that we can to utterly destroy and flatten Iran for them. Because Israel is the stalking horse for this regional hegemony. I mean,
Everybody, welcome my friend Benjai into the channel. Thanks for joining me, brother.
Israel wants regional hegemony. They're not satisfied with anything less than Iran's total destruction and dismemberment because Iran is the one state that stood up against them. So they very definitely want to see Iran destroyed. But Iran's turning out to be a much tougher nut to crack, and I don't think that's going to happen. So I think this whole thing is going to fail. The question is, how long will it take us to figure that out? And I just don't know the answer.
But in addition to chanting things like death to America, I mean, the pictures that I see out of Iran and the narrative is that, I mean, they stone women, they are extremely oppressive, that even Iranians speak out against the government and they want a sense of freedom that they haven't had since basically the 1970s. So,
well, haven't you seen thousands of these Iranians on the streets of Iran waving Israeli and American flags? There are no such pictures. There are no Israeli or American flags flying anywhere. There are not millions of people in the streets cheering the destruction of their own country.
I've even seen Iranian people posting online saying that they hope that the Ayatollah is toppled. So I guess I feel like even the Iranians are against their own government in some ways, and they would not want nuclear proliferation and that type of risk.
You have definitely internalized the wishful thinking.
Yeah, so let's just use common sense, guys. Even if you hated Barry, so Bathhouse Barry, right? If the United States was attacked by Russia, we would rally around the United States in Bathhouse Barry, right? Even if you hate Donald Trump, Orange Man bad. If communist China attacked us tomorrow, or the Iranians started launching their sleeper cells within the borders of the United States, even you hardcore anti-American, blue-haired mafia, rainbow flag worshiping leftists would start supporting Donald Trump, because when someone attacks your team, you support your team. And ultimately, we're on the same team. We're just rivals of a particular political party. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. I think that Colonel Macgregor is spot on.
That is widespread inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. I would tell you that right now, as a result of our attacks and Israel's attacks on Iran, the government in Tehran is stronger than it has ever been and has more support from the population than it has ever had in the past. This whole business of regime change is always based on false assumptions that everybody wants it and that if you just push hard enough, everything will fall apart. That's what they've said about Russia. That's what they're saying now about Iran. What I'm trying to tell you is that's not true. And I know there are lots of things online, and you and I both know that the problem with everything online is like the problem with anything on the internet. It will all put up with anything you put on it. And you also have to consider the very high probability that you're also being treated to a steady diet of disinformation and misleading statements that come out of Israel. Israel plants all sorts of stories all the time designed to make itself look great and Iran look terrible, and tries to foment hostility between the United States and virtually anybody they don't like. I would tell you, if you want to see women subjected to some degree of oppression, certainly the numbers of Christians who are being murdered right now in Syria certainly fills that bill. Now that we have the former deputy commander of ISIS in charge of Syria, thanks to the close cooperation between Mossad, the CIA, MI6, and Turkey, we have essentially a terrorist state in Syria.
That's true.
And for the moment, it's friendly to Israel because it's being told to be friendly by Mr. Erdogan in Turkey. Mr. Erdogan is in charge. You also have Saudi Arabia. You want to see women stoned and put to death? That's a great place to go. You'll find evidence for that, and beheadings and so forth. Not in Iran. So I think there's a concerted effort.
By the way, give me a bunch of ones for Brett. Thank you for supporting Team MPE, Brett. Brett just bought a whole gaggle of memberships. That's probably one of the best ways you can support my channel, guys, is to buy membership subscriptions. Once I get enough members, I'll start doing back channel shows privately where I teach people the law. I'll start with contracts, torts, and criminal law. But I just don't want to do general shows about that. I want to have people who are really interested, who are paid members, who really want to learn, because I'm not going to teach someone how to become a lawyer without law school or an undergrad unless I know they're really serious about it. And I want to get enough people on board to where I really feel like I'm spreading my seed. Well, I don't know if that's the right word, but spreading my knowledge to the right people so we can learn to form parallel systems and learn the law and mean to keep it well, as Thomas Aquinas and Sir William Blackstone intended for us as people who support English common law as altered by American common law and the Bill of Rights. So let's get back into what Colonel Macgregor has to say. Thank you again, Brett. Everybody make sure to like and subscribe to Brett's channel and make sure to give him some props for supporting my channel. Look, I know a lot of you guys don't have a lot of money, and I'm de facto losing money by not working on cases and instead bringing what I believe is very important information to the American public. Let's check it out.
To keep people in the dark about what is real and what is not, because that's essential to fomenting the support. In the final analysis, though, we're Americans first, and we have to always ask the question, what business is it of ours, what people in other countries do, regardless of where they live? This is always a problem. Should we intervene somewhere to correct someone's behavior? Because we are the model. Everyone should see us. I would point out something that's very important. There are no foreign flags on the streets in Iran. There are no secret fifth columns or anything else. But I can take you to Los Angeles and I can show you crowds with Mexican flags and El Salvadoran flags, and you'll see those in Chicago. That should be of concern to us here at home. And nobody seems to mention it.
Insurrection.
Our social cohesion is quite weak. And that's why there's no declaration of war. That's why there's no debate. If Americans found out what we were really up to, most Americans would say, why? What difference does it make to us?
It's so crazy also because if you look back at previous presidents, including President Obama, there were a lot of military strikes that he authorized. And obviously his base is not upset about that. But as soon as President Trump does something, I don't know, it's just very, very confusing to kind of figure out what's actually true and what's happening. And there's a lot of just almost like symbolic anger. If it was their team doing it, they'd be fine with it. But because it's the opposite side, they're very, very angry. And it's hard to sift through the noise. But I want to get to the financial aspect of this, because obviously if you couldn't just print money out of thin air, it would be a lot more difficult to go to war. So can you talk a little bit about how this ties into your forecast of sort of the financial Armageddon that's on the way? Because it seems like at any moment, if things do erupt, if things get more serious, that is definitely going to hit the financial markets. And we have never been more indebted. I mean, people like to say that the US dollar is backed by the military. Well, if the military has all of its equipment basically made in China and can't replenish anything, then what is the US dollar actually backed by, right? Paper promises, nothing, essentially. So what do you think about the economics of all of this?
Well, an astute economist whose views I listen to
said
to me just the other day, actually it was last night, because I got this article from Raytheon.
Same thing for Wayne. Thank you for the donation, Wayne. Guys, make sure to like and subscribe to Wayne's channel and welcome him to Team MPE. Give me a bunch of ones for Wayne. Thank you for supporting Team MPE, sir.
About their inability to produce rocket motors. And of course, we've already heard people talk about rare earths, yes, and nickel and a lot of other precious metals that we need.
Yes, they need all of that from China.
Yeah, well, he said you can't be a superpower if you can't manufacture stuff. What do we manufacture? Not much.
Debt.
That's our problem. So we've deindustrialized ourselves.
That's right.
Made ourselves entirely dependent on foreign sources.
Terrible.
You know, I've been a big advocate for rare earth exploitation, extraction here in the United States. I've also talked to lots of people with lots of money and said we've got to build our own rare earth refinery.
Amen.
Right now, if we don't send our rare earths to be refined in China, we've got to send them to Kazakhstan. That's ridiculous.
Agreed.
We've got plenty of rare earths in Canada. We have rare earths in the United States if we want to go for it. We have said in the past it's just not economically feasible. That means you can't make enough money from it. Well, we're going to be isolated, and we're going to have to make money one way or the other, and we're not going to be able to do it without our own rare earth refinery. So that's just one example. I also am paying a lot of attention right now to something that Nassim Taleb said a few days ago. He said the reserve currency is now gold.
That's right. And
he's right. It is. In other words, what good is the dollar? Well, the dollar is still very useful for transactions. We do have BRICS, and we do have an attempt to set up new parallel institutions and exchanges. It's only a matter of time until the world increasingly de-dollarizes. De-dollarization is already underway. So if you juxtapose those things together, then you ask, do we have a crisis? Well, I think we do, but no one's really talking about it. The Germans and the Italians have both said, please send us our gold. That's $143 billion worth of gold. Please send us our gold. And the answer is silence. So now people once again are asking the question, where's the gold? Do we actually have it? All of these people stored their gold under the streets of New York City.
That's right.
In these banks. Where is it?
Where is it?
If it's not there, what have you done with it? You know, I can't predict when all of this will collapse, but I think it will. And then that brings you back to your favorite topic, Bitcoin. What is really important about Bitcoin? It's a store of value.
That's right.
And the people that want to condemn Bitcoin lose sight of the fact that Bitcoin is worth what people are willing to pay for it.
That's right.
And that's a matter of perception. The same thing is true for the United States economy. It's a matter of perception. Our sovereign debt grows, I don't know, by another $1 trillion every so many months. It's insane. Yet we're going to have $1 trillion defense budget. Really? We're not going to cut any spending? Really? Yeah. We are on thin ice in a way that I don't think has ever been true in our country's history. You know, the dollar is losing the battle for credibility.
Absolutely.
But more important, our economy is losing the battle for credibility. And
100%.
when will the stock market reflect this? When people wake up and say, oh my God, I've invested in all of these pension funds and all of these pension funds are going to collapse. I'm going to lose this. You know, Freddie Mac and Freddie Mae, they came under federal control after the last debacle in 2008. I'm told that they constitute what is referred to as agency debt, as separate from sovereign national debt. That's another 7 to 8 trillion in debt. This can't go on. I mean, what did Ben Stein say? Things will continue until they can't.
That's right.
And I think an awful lot of this is psychological awareness. And most of my generation, you and I have talked about this before, the boomers. I talk to people who say, well, that's not what they said on Fox. That's not what they said on CNN. I said, good Lord, man, is that all you listen to? Well, yeah. This is the problem. I grew up with Walter Cronkite. You know, if Cronkite said something, everybody believed him. Now, was he always right? No, but 90% of the time he was. Yep. And he was doing his best to be truthful. Huntley Brinkley was very similar. These were icons that people said they're not going to lie to us. That's why when our friend Walter Cronkite said now is the time to leave Vietnam.
And by the way, I'm a Gen Xer, so I was a punk rocker and I was definitely a rebel. But I do remember as a child, everybody watched. There were only like 13 channels and a couple of UHF stations. And I remember there were just a few sources of news. And you would basically get it from Walter Cronkite or 60 Minutes. But now we have the ability to listen to guys like me who do legal research and historical research and try to cobble together something that wasn't created by these large corporations that run all of our news agencies, where they speak with a unified response. And so I do appreciate you guys joining my channel so you can get an alternative point of view. And again, if you think that I'm wrong about something, point it out in the chat. Come on my show and let's debate about it. Maybe you can teach me a thing or two. I'm not sponsored by anyone but my creator and my family. My job is to provide and protect my children and my wife. And I do this stuff because I want to pass whatever knowledge that I've been blessed with onto you to encourage you too to become a critical thinker.
Vietnam, we failed in February 1969. LBJ said, oh my God, we've lost the Vietnam War. We've lost Walter Cronkite. Well, there are no Walter Cronkites in the mainstream media. We know who owns the mainstream media. So you're getting the predigested crap that the mainstream media wants you to believe.
Well, you bring up so many interesting points, and I believe a lot of people in your generation, they still think that America has the leverage it once had around the world. But to your earlier points, we're moving into a more multipolar world. I think gold will be used increasingly as the settlement layer as opposed to treasuries, because we've abused our position as global reserve currency. I think Bitcoin is a better solution since we can actually verify Bitcoin, right, and how much there is and where it's being held, as opposed opposed to trying to figure out how much gold any single country has.
Yeah, and that's another problem with gold I wanted to point out, guys, is that stocks like GLD run by BlackRock, for example, or SLV, the issue with that is hypothecation. So you don't really own the gold, but they tell you that you do. What they do is they lease it to other people, and then it loses its value because it gets leased and leased and leased. And ultimately it loses its value. So you don't really own gold if you have stocks in gold like GLD, in my opinion. Again, I'm not a financial advisor, but I'm just telling you my research has shown that you don't really own it. And that's why I invest in gold royalties like Royal Gold or Franklin, Nevada, and I get a small royalty every month or every week, depending on what stock that I get. And obviously I sort of was forced into learning the markets because of, having a SEP IRA or a Roth IRA and wanting to defer these outrageous taxes that basically just go to pay the principal, not the principal, but for debt service on worthless currency back to a private Federal Reserve banking system, in my opinion. So for me, what I do is gold royalties and silver royalties, and I've been doing very well at that. But in particular, investing in as much cryptocurrencies as I can, in particular, Bitcoin. And of course, we know that the Federal Reserve and the leftists, the Democrats, hate Bitcoin because they want us to stay dependent on this Federal Reserve note system. And so that is another reason. But look at the other countries that are buying it up. Look at the companies that are buying it up. They realize that Bitcoin is far more valuable than a Federal Reserve note run by foreign banks. What do you guys think?
It's just not the right monetary technology for the modern day, in my opinion. But how do you see this playing out over the coming months? Because it seems like we're always able to kick the can down the road. We talked about earlier, Trump tweeted that, hey, the 12-day war, it's over now. Things are calm. But what do you think is going to happen? What should people be prepared for?
Well, I hope that people will be very skeptical about the notion that the current war is over. And I'm talking about the war in the Middle East. The war in Ukraine is not quite over. I think we're within reach of an end to this, but it's not over yet. It won't be over until the Russians cross the Dnieper, go into Kiev, and then capture Odessa, in my judgment. I think that's coming. In the Middle East, it's very different. One of two things has to happen. Iran has to be destroyed and then subjected to what we were discussing earlier, potentially fragmentation, chaos, and the installation of some new puppet regime that will respond to Israel and the United States. Or Israel faces destruction. Now, I hope that's not true, but I really do think that's where we're headed. Now, I don't know when this will recommence, but I do know from my sources inside the defense industry
that
they are very definitely doing everything they can to ramp up and provide the additional missiles and radars and other equipment that the Israelis need as quickly as possible. So that's going to go on. Will this coincide with a sudden recognition that our economy is moribund, that the numbers don't add up, the GNP numbers, the GDP numbers are phony?
Hey, Jeff.
I keep hearing about 4% unemployment. I'm suspicious. I look out there and I see an awful lot of Americans who have left the labor market. And I think that's going to become a sore point because I think ultimately the trend is this. We're moving from abundance, which we've enjoyed for decades, to scarcity. And we've made so many enemies. No one is really interested, if they can avoid it, in doing business with us. The Chinese, we unnecessarily offended them and tried to attack them with these tariffs. That hasn't worked. It's absolutely boomeranged on us. We're not getting big, beautiful trade agreements. That's all nonsense. So where are we headed? I think it's pretty obvious. We're headed into this pond where there are multiple black swans out there swimming around, Natalie. And you're asking me which one takes off first. I'm more worried about the fact that when one takes off, the others will say, oops, it's time to go too. And we'll have black swans all over the place, inside our country, in our economy, in our markets, as well as in the military and overseas.
Kurt.
And by the way, this is just some advice for the audience, because I went through this in Vietnam. When somebody steps forward and says, I just want to tell you that our men are the greatest in the world, and we have the greatest military in the world, and no one else could have done what we did, and we're the best. I remember listening to the same nonsense during the Vietnam War. It didn't rescue us from defeat in Vietnam. And I think we need to be very, very suspicious of this kind of language because it's designed to distract everyone from the truth. No one shot at us. And if no one shoots at you, it's pretty easy to look good. I hate to be blunt. It's when they shoot at you that everything changes. Now, I don't want to be shot at. I would like to avoid it, but we're still there and we're not leaving. And I don't think we will leave until we're shot at in a big way. That's the problem. So all of the inconsistencies, the weaknesses we're discussing, they could all metastasize at near simultaneously. And then we're in a lot of trouble.
It's just so frustrating that it seems like the majority of Americans, they just want peace. They just want, a livable wage. They want to be able to take care of their families. And no matter who gets in office, becoming the wealthy elites, we need people that are really in there to serve the public. And it just seems like no matter who's in office, this is why I love Bitcoin. It's apolitical and it allows you to kind of subvert everything that's happening with the government because it's a neutral monetary technology. It has nothing to do with left or right. I really have hope that this is the one thing that can actually solve some of these problems because politics is just going to destroy us, I think, from within.
Well, you saw, I hope, the Tucker Carlson interview with
RP. Good seeing you, brother.
I did, yeah.
And I think that's very, very important for Americans to watch that. Now, of course, Tucker Carlson is being attacked as an anti-Semite because he doesn't support Israel's war against Iran and its behavior in the region and what it's doing in Gaza. This is the ad hominem attack that happens immediately. They've used the anti-Semitism tripe so much now that it's beginning to lose any effect. I think what we need to understand from that, regardless of what they think about Israel, look at Cruz. Look at his answers and what he says. This is a man who's highly educated. This is a man who was elected from one of the biggest states in the country. He is potentially a very, very influential figure. And he demonstrated conclusively he's not in the game. He's not really informed. What is he interested in? He's interested in Ted Cruz and the people that provide him with the money to stay in office and the advantages of cooperating with people who have money that are willing to keep him in office. That's the problem. And I don't know how to fix that. And I don't know if you can vote your way out of it because a lot of it seems to be rigged to the point where it's impossible. Somebody said earlier today, Donald Trump, for whom we all voted on the assumption that he meant what he said and was going to get us out of these overseas quagmires and would do something serious about immigration, because the border, by the way, they're not coming over in droves, but all the illegal human and drug trafficking continues through the legal ports of entry. Because the people manning those are being paid tens of thousands of dollars on top of their salary to turn the other way. And that doesn't even begin to talk about the ports and other parts of the American border that are porous. My point is that people voted for him in the expectation that he would address these things. And they're finding out that it's not working. And this could blow up in his face in a big way in the Middle East. That could really expose him. But it's not just a question of exposing him. It's our economy, our way of life, everything that we enjoy here. It could all be crushed in a very short period of time. Because if the Straits of Hormuz inevitably are closed, if the oil is shut off for much of the world, China will survive. The Russians will double down on their production of petroleum. They'll make up the shortfalls. But the rest of the world will suffer. And the rest of the world will turn against us. It's already begun that way. That's why BRICS is so popular. BRICS is the future. BRICS is going to dominate the global economy. We aren't. We can't. We have no manufacturing base to speak of, except we build a lot of military equipment, which everybody says is the best. Doesn't look that good in Ukraine.
Well, I'm someone who does believe that a lot of America is already in a silent depression. So I hope that we can recover from this. I really do believe that everyone just needs to be a little bit more empowered in terms of their knowledge. So the education needs to just spread. They need to be watching programs with different, diverse voices so that they can better understand what is actually happening and maybe have their point of views challenged a little bit, which not enough people allow for. And I hope that they become economically empowered so that they can get through this, because there's definitely going to be some pain ahead. Any final thoughts, Colonel?
No. I think you've said it beautifully. I hope you're right. But I think people learn, unfortunately, the hard way.
Yeah, for sure. That's what worries me, for sure. A lot of people have hope, and they put their hope and their faith in their leaders, and so many times they let us down. But thank you so much for all your wisdom, your insights, your context, and I hope we get to talk again soon about more bright and happy things than 12-day wars. Thank you so much, Colonel.
Okay, thank you, Natalie.
All right, so that was the end of my segment on why I think that the war is definitely not over, and why I've been investing heavily in UVIX and FAS and things like that to try and prepare for a war, because I think it's going to happen. I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that this war is over. And I want to thank Reluctant Prophet for joining me today. Hopefully he's still here, because this next video is going to be coming directly from Reluctant Prophet and his conversation with Lane Myers. So for those of you who don't know who Lane Myers is, in my opinion, he is a freedom fighter and somebody who's been exposing corruption in the Pima County government in Arizona. And I believe that he got a raw deal. And what ended up happening with him, much like the Jan 6ers, remember the 3-hour riot at the state capitol, where the only thing allegedly stolen was a lectern that was later recovered. And the communist-run, Marxist-run news media said that it was an insurrection and that Trump's trying to overthrow the government. A 3-hour riot, but yet BLM and the Rainbow Flag Mafia were burning down cities, causing trillions of dollars in damages by most estimates. And that was considered to be a mostly peaceful riot. And now they're burning American flags and waving foreign national flags in these sanctuary cities that refuse to work with ICE to get rid of all these illegal aliens that Joe Biden flooded our country with for the sole purpose of redistricting the country blue using the U.S. Census. Remember that? That's not called an insurrection, where they're saying that we need to return all of our states of Utah, California, Nevada, Colorado, et cetera, back to Mexico. It was stolen land. Obviously, none of these people ever read the Treaty of Hidalgo. They know nothing about our history, only what they've been brainwashed to think in the public university system, which is heavily funded by communist China. Remember any of that? Well, Lane Myers is one of these guys who also thinks outside the box. And my main criticism of Lane has always been that he doesn't act with civility in court, and he flies off the handle. And so I think that the prosecutor picked up on that a jury probably would convict him. And I think with him being locked up for so long, he ultimately agreed to a plea bargain because he doesn't want to be in jail anymore. But the problem is entering into a plea bargain with the prosecutor, and the vast majority of cases, by the way, and I know this from having been a criminal defense attorney for many years and having been a practicing attorney for over 20 years, licensed in California and the great state of Texas, that the vast majority of criminal cases are resolved in a plea bargain. But the problem is once you enter into that plea bargain, now the judge, who obviously doesn't get along very well with Lane, gets to decide your fate. So it's not automatically that you're going to get a sentence that's favorable to you. And so in this case, the victim, a woman who is the wife of a city attorney who lost a case against Lane, and then Lane tried to use his journalist organization to go and interview her. It spiraled out of control. Many of people who were hostile to Lane, in my opinion, started leaving her horrific messages. And by the way, make sure to tell all your friends, guys, that we're starting the Lane Myers portion of the show. I know we started out with over 1,000 viewers. I presume many of those are Lane Myers supporters. Now I'm going to give you my breakdown of that case and the victim impact statement and how that's going to affect Lane, and some of the observations that Reluctant Prophet made I'll try to explain those to you based on my understanding of California and Texas law. Again, I'm not licensed to practice law in Arizona, so I'm not going to be able to give you any legal information as to how it would apply in Arizona. But I will tell you general legal principles and how I would handle this case or approach it, or my understanding of this case based on California or Texas law. So let's get into the video and let's listen to the phone interview that Lane Myers just recently had with Reluctant Prophet. My friend Reluctant Prophet, make sure to like and subscribe to Reluctant Prophet's channel, by the way, and support him in any way that you can. Really good guy. In my opinion, a true patriot and somebody who thinks outside the box like most of the members of Team MPE. Let's get into it.
All right, you there?
Yep.
All right, so Lesnick comes on the phone today to talk to me, and he says that Rachel just submitted a 41-page victim impact letter, and he said he was fucking super mad. He said that 10 pages, Shannon Walker, he started reading through it, 10 pages of Shannon Walker. It starts out with 10 pages of Shannon Walker, and she's saying that I need to get the maximum incarcerate time in prison, that she needs to get all the profit from the GoFundMe, the Give Send Go should go, all the money should go to her, that the judge should order YouTube to delete my YouTube channel, that the judge should put a lifetime no contact order between me and you. And then what else? Motion, same thing.
So let me give you a little background. You hear all that noise? That's because Lane is in jail. So you hear all these convicts or accused defendants talking in the background. But really quickly, just so you know, a victim impact statement is something that a judge will look at to determine, because Lane pled guilty, because obviously he's being held against his will. So under duress, obviously Lane entered into a plea agreement and he pled out. I'm not sure exactly what all he pled to. I'm hoping that Reluctant Prophet can type it into the chat box, but unfortunately he pled out, which is something that I don't allow my clients to do, typically only begrudgingly if I think they're guilty. And in this case, I don't think that Lane was guilty of the things that he was alleged of. And I think that the statute, the harassment statute in particular, is unconstitutional as applied to him. If it was going to be argued in California or in Texas before a federal judge, I think that I could have won this case on appeal. But Lane didn't want to go up on appeal because he thought he would stay in jail too long. He didn't want to file a writ because he felt that he would stay in jail too long based upon my understanding of what he did. So instead, he entered into a plea deal. But what that did is it pretty much guaranteed that he's not going to get out of jail. And this victim's witness impact statement is a statement that a judge will take into consideration before sentencing him. And in this case, the judge is trying to force Lane Myers to turn over donations that he received for his legal defense to the alleged victim. And so I'll do another show about the legalities of that. But just keep in mind that a judge has broad discretion to pretty much do whatever the hell the judge wants. And by pleading out, Lane gave him the ability to do that. So let's keep listening.
She compared it. She said this is worse than the professor being killed. They got killed. And then Matt Walker wrote a letter, and then a bunch of the prosecutors from the city, a bunch of city prosecutors wrote letters, and they didn't sign them. They said anonymous, and then a couple wrote that they were signing it anonymously because they didn't want to be stalked, harassed, and threatened. And then some people from the College of Law wrote letters too, saying that this was worse than what happened.
And so the victim, I think, was a law professor, and her husband is a prosecutor who lost a case against Lane. And Lane had found out through his investigative journalism that the wife was actually working with the city attorney's office in some form. And he was trying to find out, why is it that a tax-funded university, a law school, is working with the city attorney, because it seems like it has the appearance of impropriety. And so what ended up happening is Lane tried to interview her. It didn't work out. I think he called her one time. And then people who I believe are hostile to Lane Myers started calling her and leaving messages on her answering machine threatening her. So nobody really knows who these people were, but she's claiming that they're supporters of Lane Myers. And without establishing any foundational evidence to prove that, it was accepted as true by the prosecutor's office. And so that's kind of where we're at. I'm trying to get you guys up to speed. Let's keep listening.
Happened to the professor.
That's wild.
I got killed.
That's wild.
41-page victim impact letter.
40?
I'm cooked, bro.
Did you say 41 page?
Yeah, 41. She wrote 10 pages herself. Beyond insane, bro. Wait till you get a copy of all this and post it. Lifetime no contact order between me and you. We can't even be friends anymore. They said potion too, and lifetime no contact. They said that I should never be allowed. No, they said that the judge should order me to never be allowed to have social media again for the rest of my life. All this kind of shit, crazy shit.
Well, obviously, that's going to have major First Amendment implications. And if Lane does his jail time, I don't think he would be subject to an order like that. But if he agrees to be released, he could sign a conditional release agreement that he would be thrown back in jail if he breaks it. So basically, what they're trying to do is restrict Lane Myers' free speech rights under the First Amendment. I'm hoping that the judge can see through what's going on here, because the cat's already out of the bag and people are going to be talking about this for years on their own social media channels. So regardless of what they do, irrespective of what they do to Lane in preventing him from having his say, other people, it's just going to embolden other people to talk about it, and also cause other people to lose their faith in the Pima County justice system, as well as the tax-funded university system. That's ultimately all that's going to happen here. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree.
Yeah. They all said I should get the maximum incarceration. Resnick said there was over 200 letters in support of me, though, too. But, I mean, those are from people, and then you got so basically a bunch of prosecutors at the city prosecutor's office who have never even had my cases said that if it wasn't Matt Walker who had my case, it would have been them, and the same thing would have happened to them. That's why I need to be maximum incarcerated. I didn't know that all of them had wives that were public officials, government employees. They said they were all scared of me. But why did they dismiss the charges if they were scared of me? And why didn't they put charges on me for stalking or threatening or something? This whole thing is fucking. And then the probation department is supposed to do like a report before sentencing, and they didn't even call Kat to verify anything. So that's a huge red flag, saying that they're just recommending prison, so they didn't even verify my housing or none of that shit.
Oh, wow. Well,
prison, bro. For showing a YouTube video. I mean, a government website on YouTube.
And so for those of you who don't know, the issue is that Lane Myers on his YouTube channel shared her university publicly available website information on a taxpayer-funded website. He gave out her work phone, tax-funded work phone, and tax-funded contact information of her workplace, not her private information where she lives or anything, or her personal information, but tax-funded information that anybody else could have looked up on the internet. And that really is the basis of her complaint against Lane in a nutshell. Let's keep listening.
I mean, he could still give me information, but I don't see Metcalf as having any kind of courage to be able to listen to Shannon Walker say that this is worse than the professor get murdered, and then not, you know what I mean, be like, oh, cool story, but probation. It was in there, like that she's saying that he should order as a condition of my sentence that me and you can never talk again. I don't know why. She didn't say why. She didn't say she didn't say because of, you know what I mean, XYZ. You'll see it. It's filed, it'll be part of the public record.
When do they file it? After they get to court, or is it filed before your trial?
Today.
Oh, it was filed today?
Yeah.
So if anybody has access to the public filing, I would like to do a show about it and share the victim's witness impact statement, as well as the redacted witnesses who are against Lane Myers, as well as the letters in support of Lane, just to sort of give you an idea of the flavor of how this sentencing portion of his plea works. So you'll understand the ramifications of entering into a plea agreement and the dangers of what it could present to you and your family and your livelihood.
That's what he said. It was filed the day that, and they waited to the last second so that then I had to continue my sentencing to, like, you know, it's a whole thing, bro. It's crazy.
What do you mean continue your sentence?
Because if I want to, like, file, like, a motion to strike those from the record, you know, so that you can't use that shit. Because it's like, are they even allowed to do that?
I wouldn't think so. They're not even relative in the case.
Well, I mean, it's supposed to be the victim, not, you know what I mean? Why is the city prosecutor allowed to give a victim? How are they the victim is what I don't understand. It's supposed to be the victim talking. How were they impacted by...
Well, I'll explain how this works. So it is true that the state actually can stand in the place of a victim. And this happens a lot with domestic violence claims in California and Texas, where let's say that you beat your wife, hypothetical, and you guys make up, you have makeup, sex or whatever. And, you know, her adrenaline rush, the thrill of having power over you goes away, and she realizes you're going to go to jail. So what does she do? She retracts and refuses to testify. Well, the prosecutor then takes the place of the victim, and the people of the state of Arizona in this case, or if it was California, the people of the state of California, et cetera, they become the victim. And that's why their testimony and their statements have great weight and authority with the judge. So yes, the state becomes the victim. And so this is something that you have to be very careful about. And another reason why I'm very reluctant to allow someone to be a pro per or pro se litigant when they're facing potential felony charges or a felony conviction. And it's very rare that when you plea out to a case that you'll know the recommended sentencing. It doesn't happen all the time. And in this case, obviously, Lane was not given the opportunity to get a recommended sentence. And even if he was, it would have been irrelevant because the judge and the prosecutor can change their mind. And even based on this video, this statement that he gave over YouTube that was later played for the public could be used against him to alter or vary what the judge originally was going to sentence him with. And that's why I always recommend that my clients try to keep it to a minimum and never disparage the victim, especially if they pled guilty, and then start saying disparaging things about the victim, because that definitely could sway against the defendant at the sentencing phase. So it's very, very scary. I feel really bad for Lane and his family. And anyways, let's keep listening so you can kind of hear what happened here. It's only about another, 15 minutes or so.
What I did to Shannon.
What's that?
Her mom had one too.
Oh, wow. I don't want to
show her, Matt, her mom, and a bunch of prosecutors at the prosecutor's office, and a bunch of people from the College of Law who said this is worse than the professor that got killed. That is what really made Resnick mad, but it's not like he's going to do anything.
Yeah. Man.
So I was trying to I wasn't calling you because I know that, they would be like, oh yeah, he's still, but because I was trying to be like, okay, but then they're playing dirty.
They want to destroy your life. That's what Pima County does.
I know. Prison, bro.
And Peter Gilbert does ask an interesting question. He says, well, can't you cross-examine the witnesses? Well, yeah, that's where you do that is at trial. But once you plea out, the judge has broad discretion to control the proceedings, hide witness names, conceal their information, redact statements to protect the witnesses from potential violence. That's why I'm very reluctant to ever allow any of my clients to plea out until they fully understand the ramifications of what they're doing.
That'd be wild, bro. To go to prison over all this?
Yeah.
And then they're saying I can't talk to you. That's just.
But they're letting you talk to me right now.
She said that all the money should go to her. Would other people not be able to donate to me?
So she,
See what I'm saying? How crazy they are?
She wants the money from your legal fund.
Yes. She said
So
because I'm.
She sat
She
there.
goes because I'm representing myself.
She sat there in court.
Well, Rhine Labs asked, can anybody ever redact a plea? Well, absolutely. But see, what the problem is that's typically going to be based upon ineffective assistance of counsel. And because Lane represented himself, that was a powerful tool that he won't be able to use now, in my opinion, if this was in California anyways. So when you represent yourself, you can't really say I was ineffective assistance of counsel of myself. And then number two, you enter into this plea agreement where you knowingly and voluntarily, under penalty of perjury in front of a court, agree that you're guilty. And we don't know what the plea agreement was yet. So I don't even know what he pled out to, but I would assume that it was felonies. Now, he may have received a lighter deal, maybe 2 misdemeanors. But even so, based on the way Lane sounds, it sounds like state prison might be an issue. So that tells me if it's state prison, that it's probably felony, because typically you don't go to state prison for misdemeanors. Typically you go to like a county jail. So I don't know how it works in Arizona, but that's how it works in California and Texas. So let's keep listening.
She got paid by tax dollar. And now she wants to steal the money from the people who donated that think you're innocent. What a slap in the fucking face.
She said that if it doesn't go to her, it should go to the ACLU.
Even with advisory counsel, to answer your question, since it was advisory counsel and not attorney of record, in other words, a friend of the court, I don't think he stands on solid ground to withdraw the plea. And typically that would be done through, in California, a writ of coram nobis or a motion to reconsider if it was going to be done at the lower court level. So I don't see this as being a possibility under California law. However, there may be something that I don't know. Look, Lane has proven me wrong multiple times, guys. So I'm not going to sit here and second guess what his strategy might be. I don't know what it is, if he has one at all. But I do know that it appears as though all these things were being done reluctantly and were being done under extreme duress. And being in jail, you can't really think straight, guys. Let's keep listening.
That's
like the judge can just take people's money that they donated and fucking take it.
It just shows you their mindset. You can never talk to this person, just make an order to take this.
In Wolf's Watch, if you want to know more about what Lane did, I would recommend going over to Reluctant Prophet's YouTube channel. He's got a whole series on it. And it's pretty extensive. So that would be a great way for you to learn. There's some other channels as well, but I want to get this over because I'm getting kind of hungry myself and I got to go get some chow. So let's get this over so we can close it out.
Money, make an order to tell YouTube to shut. These people have a God complex, man. That's crazy.
No social media ever again. For life.
Well,
so I can't have a GoFundMe that is for my, it's like, how do people can have I thought people can donate or not. It's up to them. I don't think anybody that donated was lied to.
The people who donate, she basically wants to punish everybody that donated by giving her the fucking money. That's how sick they are. They want to punish every.
Or the ACLU. Yeah.
Is that that's the Civil Liberties Union?
American Civil Liberties Union.
Yeah, the ACLU is basically a far left organization that in the past also supported people who were quasi-conservative, but now many people allege that they're basically bought and owned by non-governmental organization tax funding from the left, as well as organizations like George Soros nonprofits. And they've always been to the left. So the fact that she wants to give it to the ACLU tells me a little bit more about where she leans politically. Let's keep listening.
So oh boy.
She said a real First Amendment. People that are actually fighting for the First Amendment, they're like the ACLU.
Crazy.
Yeah, a bunch of the prosecutors said that they were scared of their life, and I made them fear for their life. How? Insane.
These people have no conscience whatsoever.
I know. I don't see how they can put those conditions on me, though. So, the only way you can put those conditions on me is probation.
Still crazy.
So if he sends me to prison, then I'm a free man when I get out. I can do whatever I want. But these crazy people will probably send me to prison and give me probation. You know what I'm saying?
What's the maximum?
4.5.
They want you to spend 5 years in prison?
Wow.
Yep. Without even a blink of an eye.
Yeah, because they've convinced themselves that they'll actually sleep better at night.
41 pages, bro. She wrote a 10-page letter.
So now everything relies on Honorable Judge Metcalf.
I have zero faith.
Zero? That's pretty bleak, man.
I have a less than zero, bro. No. From the beginning, I knew I was going to prison the day that Judge Miller said. The day that Judge Miller lacked courage to say that there was no felony.
That's right, Ryan Labs.
Because I realized that the judges are not independent, impartial thinkers. They're just part of the go along, get along, rubber stamp gang.
Oh yeah, I mean that's obvious.
The city prosecutors all sent letters anonymously, except one of them, Kevin Franklin. And he said that if it wasn't Matt Walker, it would have been me, and he probably would have done the same thing to me.
Oh, he was the only one to put his name on it.
Yep.
They even wanted to do it anonymously? What a bunch of cowards.
Their names were redacted. Their names were, they signed it assistant deputy prosecutor, and one signed it afraid to sign my name because I'll be stalked, harassed, and threatened. Government employees.
So you were reading me part of the victim impact statement? That's what that was?
Yeah, Resnick read me we only had like 10 minutes. He's going to pull me up tomorrow. Like I said, it's hard to talk to this guy. And he's always last minute. And, he read me some of Shannon's 10 pages, and then he said that a bunch of them signed it anonymously. And then he said the one where they said, I'm afraid to say my name because I'll be stalked, threatened, and harassed. And then Kevin Franklin, and then some people from the law school. And they have the Innocence Project at the UVA Law School. It was some Rubin guy. Yeah, who said it was worse than the professor being killed. They were doing an Innocence Project case where a lady killed her own daughter in the closet by starving her and beating her. They were helping her try to get off. That's worthy of their cause, I guess. The part of that the money, that the judge should order the money. Like, what is this? Like, that just shows how out of touch thinks this judge is God. Like, he can just tell this company to give the money that people donated from their bank account to somebody else other than the person they donated it to. Like, I mean, and I think that Metcalf is going to fall for it all.
I hate to think so, but you know what? He doesn't. I don't have a lot of faith.
You gotta protect the community.
Out there on the internet and people giving people shit and all that kind of stuff. Like, this is
Seems like the only people that read a letter are government employees.
What's that?
The only people that read a letter in the victim thing was government employees.
Yeah.
Oh, and her mom. Which your mom is fine, okay. But government employees.
Yeah.
I wonder why Shannon Walker doesn't think that, like, that, what did you do? So, you know what I mean? Why can't I talk to you?
I thought you said it was Rachel that was saying that. It's Shannon Walker saying that you can never talk to me again?
Yeah, Rachel hasn't, nothing I said was from Rachel. It was from Shannon.
I think it's time for this country to take back our country. This is an issue of government transparency. We can't trust a government that does not trust its people. We're going to uncover the cover-up, and I hope this is just the beginning of more people coming forward about this.
Yeah, make sure to like and subscribe to Reluctant Prophet's channel, by the way. Really good guy, really decent perspective, a true patriot, somebody who's a freedom fighter who believes, like I do, that less government means more freedom. So, guys, I really do appreciate you guys joining me today. I appreciate all the super chats and subscriptions that you guys purchased today. It means a lot to me, you supporting my channel. Another way that you can also support Team MPE is to pick up a copy, a digital version of my ebook, not this soft cover, but a digital version of my ebook, My Journey to Becoming a Practicing Lawyer with No Law Degree or Undergrad. And the way you get that is to go to the description section of my YouTube channel, drop it down. There's a PayPal link. Anybody who's interested, it's an inspirational story where I talk about my journey to doing that and then ultimately becoming a California lawyer, attorney, as well as a Texas attorney. Without having to go through the Marxist-run education system to do it, enabling me to be a free thinker and being able to think outside the box more than someone who was taught in a cookie-cutter approach method. And so with that being said, guys, it's been I think I've been on since like 8:45, so I'm exhausted, I'm hungry, I'm tired. But I really, really appreciate you guys joining me today. I don't know when I'm going to be able to go live again. I have a huge caseload. I have some briefs that are due on Monday. So I'm going to be working late into the evening. But I do appreciate all you patriots and everybody joining me today. Thank you, Gloria Ad, for supporting my channel. Let's OTVO. Thank you for showing up. If anybody can get me additional material like the witness impact statements, we can break those down in another show in the future. And I'm hoping to hear from Reluctant Prophet. Maybe we can do a show together. I want to thank John Filax for showing up today, Felix, whatever you want to call him, for showing up today from his car and sort of helping me understand a little bit about the history and geopolitical tensions going on over in the state of Israel with respect to the history of the temple, where it was located, et cetera, the Roman invasion, and ultimately the Philistine conquest, and having the Romans turn it over to the Philistines and later renaming the country to Palestine and all that stuff, and our opportunity to discuss the Balfour documents and the Rothschild and their creation of the modern Zionist state of Israel. And so thank you so much, guys, everybody, for joining me today. And with that being said, make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to save, because we never know when the thought police are going to take down this channel. Semper Fi.